Hey guys, how's it going?
Greetings.
Greetings and salutations.
Hey, happy Sunday.
Good to have you all here. I see that we have, well, let me just find out. My friend's face is filling the entire screen. It's going to be awesome. Because we got the whole, because you have your video webcam on, but that's Lyle. And we have, let's see, Michael, well, Duff, of course, James, Chris from Take Back Space, another, let's see, oh my God. Sorry, I'm trying to see everybody, but I have too much stuff on. It's just such a big screen. All right.
It happens, man.
All right, there we are. We got everyone. Okay, so Chris Kelly, of course, from England. Buddy's here. Sean. We have Daniel here, who's live micing us, I think. Someone is. And Tess, of course, is here. Tess Clark. And, of course, Shockwave or Rick. So, guys, how's it going today?
Delighted to be out of the rain.
Beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Nice to be out of the cold.
Yes.
Happy to be here.
Yo.
I wasn't actually expecting it to be as oddly awkward as that. Usually, you guys were all talking up a storm literally seconds ago. I should never warn you that it's actually starting. I should just start the show and then just let it keep going, you know? Anyway, you guys have
That's a hell of an idea.
Yeah, and then you guys are like sitting there, what's go like? It started. Did it start? Did it? That would be great.
I'm not fearless, but I pretend to be.
So, if I'm not mistaken, someone was just mentioning something interesting about what was just found out. Like I believe, Duff, you were, or Chris, one of you were going over the history of Voyager, and specifically the magnetometers and stuff that they brought on, and to explore this very question that we are now exploring, since they launched this thing, 45, 46, 47 years ago, and designed it years before that. So you're right, actually, it is 50 years old, that technology. And it's now passing through the heliopause, traveling out into interstellar space. Well, or is it? And that's the question, right?
Yeah, the quick note that we were talking about was just how they built in these plasma experiments, a plasma laboratory on these craft, and a magnetometer, and whether they were measuring plasma density or charge density as they moved through the ether or space. And I thought that was really fascinating. I'd done a little bit of research, but there's not that much information. And I think it was Daniel who mentioned he had talked as well about it.
Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, Gareth and I spoke for a while about that. Apparently, Voyager 1 did not have the same plasma experiment. Voyager 1 left the heliopause near solar maximum, and Voyager 2 obviously near solar minimum. Voyager 2 detected plasma leaking out of the heliopause. Voyager 1 did not, but also did not have the same experiment running. For whatever reason, it failed.
It actually failed previous to it, so they knew that the equipment wasn't going to measure anything when it went through.
Well, yeah, there's this is also when they weren't shielding things nearly as well. Just their first satellite was launched in Sputnik, and the one the United States launched that had a camera on it, and then they picked up the footage, and it was all messed up because it had no electrostatic shielding on it whatsoever. So anytime metal rubbed against metal with a machine twisting, and it's just causing sparks to go flying. This is one of the things that we were talking about a lot is, and not to distract what we were to talk about, but on Europa, they said that they found geysers. And immediately I knew what they found, and I knew that they weren't geysers. So for the same reason, basically, just like in Canada, when the snow is really, 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 really dry, like bone dry. It is, every single thing on your body is staticky. There's nothing you can do about that. And your hair goes everywhere, and you know, fabric softener is our friend. You know, I'm sure Lyle can attest to that.
Yeah, just a little bit.
So, guys, we're talking about now. Yeah, the magnetometer. By the way, I think one of them failed simply because, well, a few things failed on it. Like even the transmitter failed on one of them. Probably the same one. I'm not even sure what happened. I think it was a bypassing one of the major moons, like Jupiter or Saturn, when they flew by it. And you know, now looking back on it, you're sending this thing zooming through the magnetic fields of a gas giant, and you expect there to be no effects, you know?
Yeah, there's Gareth's video showing the plasma density changes.
Hmm.
They called it a plasma experiment. We're not sure exactly what the nature of the plasma experiment was, only that it did not, send data on Voyager 1. The Voyager 2 one showed plasma leaking out of the heliosphere, though, and that was at solar minimum.
Well, yeah, plasma will leak out because it's. If you think about the heliopause, in my vision of this, you got to sort of think about them as 6 cells in plasma, and going across a very large diffuse double layer, which is, a capacitive layer, the end of the sun's electrical influence. Then there's a boundary between that and whatever other structures that are either seen or unseen that are around the sun, and of course in the solar area, I guess.
There's a great graph.
Yes, and you can see the crossing the double layer right there. They call it a shock wave, of course, but they don't really understand, I don't think. And they see the magnetic field now of the interstellar medium, I think, which is basically the alignment. And now they think of that, of course, as the arm of the galaxy, but we're thinking that as more of the local chimney alignment. Am I not mistaken on this? And they both went above and below the IBEX line, which is kind of interesting.
I think you are not mistaken on this.
Okay.
There's a lot of people that wouldn't know what those words you're saying mean.
Gibbly gobbly, gobbly gobbly gobbly. Did I just say nothing to you, Lyle?
Neil, would you explain leaking a little bit more in the context of what we're talking about? How would you measure that? Is it disorganization?
No.
Or is it structure that's supposed to be there? Yeah.
Think of it as a sort of it's loosely on fire. If that makes any sense. The boundary is not going to be perfect where they're at. I mean, they're in the middle of the pumping action above and below the heliopause, or well, the equator, solar equator, the equatorial, I guess, and that's where the solar wind goes out, hits, and begins to neutralize, and then starts flowing up and down towards the poles so they can become part of the circuit again. This is my interpretation of these events. Now, of course, we do have the aspect of, here it is right here on the arm. Like it's attached to this thing here. This is what's powering it, if you get my meaning. Now that's...
Yeah, I get your meaning.
That's probably what I'm seeing. Now, I know that we have other points of view here, so that's not a problem.
Neil, can I just reference
is,
something to the stream though, real quick? We seem to be buffering pretty badly, so I wonder if you can reduce maybe, or check your connection maybe, because people are experiencing bad buffering.
Oh.
Just want to let you know.
Take a look here. Oh. That's odd.
It's not your typical shiny
So my
quality.
Yeah, I know. I've dropped 66.4% of the frames. What in God's name's going on?
Sounds like what happens when I try to stream.
Let's see. Okay, this is mine. Okay, that's not mine.
Mainly because you don't want to cut, like if you're talking about topics, you don't drop out.
Ladies and gentlemen, the miracle of modern technology.
Yeah, I know.
I'll quickly jump in.
Neil, I would
yeah.
take the
Go ahead.
I would
Sorry.
take the moment to say I'd like to see where the you would expect the poles to be on that last diagram. That diagram right there, where it says direction of the sun's movement. I'd like to see that on the whiteboard with the poles drawn in, because the sun is not moving into its poles. That's a major point that I think a lot of people aren't understanding when it comes to the reference to the sun's interaction to the galactic Birkeland currents.
The energy's not coming in the poles. I'm very interested in that statement. I think in the motion of the interstellar cloud would be where the Pleiades is. Galactic center is where it says it is. And Sirius would be behind the sun, Altair in front of it, along the pipe.
Yeah.
So
the sun's poles are like where that purple downward arrow would be, and 180 degrees of that toward A Centauri on that diagram, I'd say, right?
Honestly, I don't know. I would think I could sort of know where we are in relationship to it abstractly, but if I'm thinking about it from the planet Earth and looking up, I know where the galactic center is. Go ahead.
I think the equatorial plane points more towards Sirius. The galactic center is like 40 degrees off of the sun's pole, so it should be something like.
I know what I need to do here. Okay, it's going up a bit now. But yeah, there was a lot of dropped frames and stuff, so I'm wondering what's going on there. I'm thinking I'm going to disconnect and reconnect very quickly. We'll stay on the call, of course. Well, I might drop because I'm going to switch a thing. But just in case that's the problem, I don't want that to be a continuation issue. So better safe than sorry. Oh wait, no. If I stop the stream,
it'll pick back up if you do it within a minute.
Oh, good. I'll do everything very quick.
If you shut down, I do
Nice.
have the same problem sometimes. It'll drop a ton of frames. Restart OBS and see, maybe it'll work.
Well, I can't stop I don't want to drop the thing because it will stop the stream and it'll be all messed up. So if I do it real quick, though, it should work because I'm ninja. Look at that. Did that work? Am I
Coming back online?
Isn't the first rule about Ninja Club?
Don't talk about Ninja Club.
Pretty sure that's the first rule of Ninja Club, guys.
Yes. Oh, it dropped again. Oh, okay. No. Looks better.
Looks way better.
For the record, I'm not hearing the buffering here. So Neil is coming in clear for me.
Oh, no, it's the stream.
Oh, it was just the video.
The video and the
on
stream.
Skype you won't notice, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'm not sure if there's anything else in the house running. I tried to disconnect. He plugged in a little router, my friend did, into here. So I basically bypassed the router, unplugged the router, and plugged it straight into my computer. So screw whatever these computers were attached to. And if the router's an issue, it's no longer an issue because I removed it. So hopefully then nothing else is an issue and we're going pretty streamy and looks good. So
decisive action, sir.
Let's hope that takes care of it.
Definitely looks like it's working better. Nice, Neil.
Good. Fingers crossed it stays that way, folks. Okay, so I guess we're going to come back with a few questions about what some of these terms are. I'm going to start the little intro there. And my friend Lyle, who I hope is still here. I can't tell because it's...
Oh yeah, I'm still here.
Good. Okay, because you're actually going to do me a huge favor in a way because you're friendly, yet you have no idea what the hell we're talking about. You probably never even watched Thunderbolts of the Gods or any of that stuff. So guys, this is who he is, and I know that you were all there at one time. So feel free to say hi. And I told him that I just run a cult. He's more than welcome to join in. So this is the gentleman I said that story to, in case you're wondering.
Hi,
Just
Lyle.
transfer your
That's
life savings.
awesome.
Everything will be fine.
Oh, yes, exactly.
Welcome.
Hi,
welcome,
Lyle. This
welcome.
is Shockwave. I think we spoke on Discord a few weeks back.
Yeah, I think we did. Yeah. Oh, as far as my life savings, you ain't gonna get much.
Oh, no, don't worry about that. There's none of that stuff. So, all right. So I'm gonna let's see if I can actually do this preview here and make that happen. That'll be kind of interesting because I'm gonna have to do it live, of course. So I love it when that happens. See if I can actually manage to pull that off without screwing anything up. We'll see. Welcome to the November 24th edition of the Electric View. I'm Neil Thompson. Today we're discussing the solar environment, the new revelations about the Solar Heliopause that Voyager just passed through, and what that tells the Electric Universe Theorists about where we are in the solar system. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. All right, well, it looks like that worked out perfectly. So, or at least as best as could be, considering it was live.
As usual, perfect.
Wow.
What a velvety voice.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
right? I was just thinking that.
I actually
He's no
managed.
Gareth, but it sounds good.
Well, I can't do the British thing that he can do. I'm a colonial, so one of
The
these
French
people.
accent?
No. I was going to pretend to speak French. No, because someone who is French is going to listen to that and go, "You got to stop talking." So.
Yes, this would be a bad plan, yeah.
Oh yes, and of course yeah. Plus, we're also in the place where we speak a lot of Chiac, so or Franglais as they call it. So.
Shaq, I thought you meant like Shaq O'Neal.
No, it's from Shediac. Everyone in this area speaks French and English as a hybrid. Like I will be normally speaking to someone and they could switch to French and then back to English and the conversation continues. No one even says a word.
Oh,
we
jeez.
allez, Neil. Come on.
So not like Bubbles on Trailer Park Boys at all.
What's Bubbles do? Well, Bubbles is from Nova Scotia. They're not quite the same. But when they went to Moncton,
Yeah, but he has some weird accent. There's like a name for the accent that he has. Like he's imitating some kind of special Canadian accent. And believe me, I don't know anything about this kind of stuff. I'm lucky if I've been to Massachusetts. Actually, I was to Canada, just like on the Niagara Falls area once, but very short period of time.
He's trying to emulate the average Canadian's accent.
it can be pretty. Well, it depends on where you're from. Each little place is kind of unique, but up here in this particular area, there's a lot of. It's a hub city. It's a bilingual city, and in a bilingual province. So it's French and English is perfectly normal. Like it's just no one mentions it, and I don't think of it as odd even now. Like
I blame cosmic rays.
It did when I was in St. John. We would sort of chuckle, like me and Lyle would go, "Dude, he's speaking French. That's cool." But that's because we didn't speak French in St. John because it's mostly Anglophone city. So.
And even the French use the expression "a."
Oh yes, we do. Yes, they do. I guess. Oh my God, a lot more too.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. So anyway, besides making fun of ourselves,
it's about to get crazy. It's about to get crazy in here.
You're bothering me there. So, but we need to figure out then. Well, we have some people online who probably are here now. We were lined up before. I'm sorry for being late. I forgot a piece to my headset. So, what are people saying in the chat? I'm sure we have some questions. And we're now going to have to see if we can ask Lyle some directly. So,
Well, there are no chat questions currently at the moment. It just seems to be people saying hi and getting to know each other and seeing who's here and so on and so forth. But carry on.
We'll carry on. Well, okay, good. So we don't have any questions yet. So, Lyle, do you know what we're talking about at all?
Actually, a little bit. Actually, I did actually do a little bit of reading up to see what you were into. So.
Oh, well, that's a very nice friend thing to do. Wow. So yeah, and I'm sure that you've. Well, it's also good. You're a person who also thinks. So you're going to go where there are people who are disagreeing as well. So.
Oh yeah, naturally. I always love playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, exactly. So, what do you think that we're talking about here? We're basically, or if you, just, and of course you must have some questions. So I want to hear them.
Well, the thing is, I was already interested in the fact of the heliopause and the heliosphere when the Voyagers went out into it, and the fact that they discovered it was actually hotter than they were expecting it to be. So that had already intrigued me into that story. So finding out what you guys are talking about, including into it, is quite interesting.
I can't argue with that. One of the things that we're discussing is the heliopause itself. Does it have a well? When it's a transfer point for energy. It's a cell in the plasma. So the solar wind would be the end of one part of it. And so, as I said, it would go and neutralize. That's where you see that ring in the ibex or whatever that picture is. That's of neutral hydrogen. So they're going there, they're neutralizing, and they start basically becoming. The magnetic field is sort of making a circular motion, if you get my meaning, toroidal motion around the star, and as such, they're going to go up and come back down. They come in through the poles. And my explanation or my thoughts here is that I said it should be energetic because it needs to express the amount of energy that all of the sun and all of the planets, every single piece of energy that is run by or is a load on this circuit, must be expressed also in the heliopause. Now, the sun is incredibly small compared to the surface area of the heliopause, and what they're seeing coming off it is basically pieces of plasma that are moving just like they are accelerated along the edge of the sun or accelerated along the edges of our ionosphere weakly, thermosphere, I guess, in a way. We're seeing that same effect. We're seeing basically that connection.
A bow shock.
Well, it's more like a connection between. It's like two layers of capacitance. Each layer has a different layer of charge. The first one they just went through, then there's going to be the next one, and so on. Just like cloud layers, if you were.
All right. I don't want to discombobulate what you're saying by saying a bow shock. Cheers. Right on.
Okay. Well, they say bow shock, and that's where it would be in their model, so I can't really complain. But we're obviously exploring that option.
I wasn't refuting what you were saying. I was just, I thought you were at a loss.
So one of the things my understanding is that basically the heliosphere is the physical evidence of the magnetic sphere of the sun, which protects the solar system from cosmic rays and cosmic currents, the same as the Earth's magnetic field does from solar rays and solar currents.
Well, in a way, yes.
Now, here's what I'm questioning. Now, you guys are thinking that you're getting the plasma ejection from the helio out into the interstellar space because of the galactic currents?
Well, actually,
the Brooklyn currents, I think you call them.
That's actually exactly the term. But what we're saying is that the expression of all the loads on all the surfaces. So basically, the surface of the sun is very bright and very hot, and above it, it's even hotter. because that's where the load is being expressed, just like the anode of a star. It's like a piece of dust in a plasma chamber. That, yeah, I've described the sun as a piece of dust, but that's what it kind of is. Now, all of us are orbiting that piece of dust, and we get our power from it. That's my theory. We have arguments that, no, it's not exactly like that. But generally speaking, in some way, it is. They are also getting their power from the galactic arm through this chimney that we're in. So that is what is powering all of what we see, and likely all of life and everything else. So that's the feeling that we're having in this particular thing. All weather, all of that. There's no latent heat inside the planet Earth. It's actually active heat. It's actually being generated. There's things going on, and it's still being powered by these currents, and we must process them because we are loads on that circuit. And since the rules of electrical engineering apply here, since we are also on this current, then the heliopause is this boundary layer must express equally everything that is being expressed on all the planets, except over a much larger area. And that's what I think we're seeing with these this 3,000 to 6,000 degree eddies of fire. It's just like the prominence is coming off the sun, but at a much lower power, if you're getting my meaning.
Yeah. I can't necessarily agree with the exact why it's happening, but I can definitely understand where you're saying why you're seeing these ejecta. That makes perfect sense to me, because everything that happens inside the sphere is going to affect going to cause fluctuations in the outer sphere.
Actually, yes.
And vice versa.
But that's assuming. Well, one could say the sun would be affecting it if you're using the conventional model, but in our particular model, we're saying this is a boundary layer, which is a connection, a bridge, if you will, between that and something else. What does it connect to? And what is the alignment of these? Well, that's what we were looking at before. The alignment of, I think it was in one of these pictures, if I'm not mistaken. We were showing how, right here, how there's an actual interstellar magnetic field, they call it.
Yeah. Now, he mentioned about which direction is that coming in from the thing. Now, Sirius is the North Star, so it's pretty much...
Polaris is a North Star.
Okay, where's Sirius on the horizon?
Sirius is a very special case, but I will... it's actually behind us we actually talk about this star quite a bit, so it's amazing that you mentioned it. It's one of the rarest stars because it's behind us on the tube, as it were.
Follow the path of the red
Correct.
arrows, and you'll find Sirius.
Pretty much, yeah.
And it's not a pole star. It's not a star that's anywhere near either celestial pole, indicating that the sun's poles are not pointing toward it.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to verify.
It rises in July, I believe.
Well, we see it. You can see it. It's basically the three wise men, or the three Orion's belt, points directly towards Sirius. You can see it there. It's the brightest thing in the sky.
Okay.
The star in the east. So
Check out in-the-sky.org. You make a sky chart for yourself.
Anyway, neither here nor there. It happens to work on a weird thing. Sirius doesn't move in rotation. It actually stays right around the same angle from us, like on our...
Have you ever had the feeling you're being followed, Neil?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's basically following us. It's very it doesn't precess, basically, and that alone, the not precession, is leading us to follow the idea that it is along the current with us, and we're beginning to see that the reason precession might happen in the first place is that the entire solar system precesses all at once as it goes down this pipe, as it were, because the pipe is spiraling like a snake.
Okay.
And so we too. Well, actually, it's probably two pipes spiraling, but
like a rope.
Yeah, like a twisted rope or pigtails or something.
I think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So that's basically what we're talking about. So I guess we can see where it is right here. This would be north and south of the for the sun right here, which is basically not quite. It's basically not aligned to either of them, which in a way makes perfect sense. If you were influenced by both of these things, the electric motion and, of course, the magnetic field, you will try to find a boundary layer between them that is not either of them. So you are a load, but you're not full on to the direct. You know what I mean? Not directly aligned to it. Things tend to basically spin around
just
on a
like
slight
the Earth
angle.
versus the sun.
Yeah, you're getting the idea.
Just like the Earth versus the sun.
You're seeing it, yes.
So that
only
means
Jupiter.
The current would be coming in pretty much right at the equator of both the solar system.
Yes,
like
well, I think that IS flow would be the interstellar flow. They call it a flow of particles, but they don't actually understand what this might be doing. It might be like a magnetosphere flowing across us, like across the Earth's magnetosphere, and even though they're not shown in this particular picture, at the north and south points, I think we have actually over here, right here, there should be two currents from the north and south heading into the sun, and that right there would be
there should be a current going in and out of the North Pole and in and out of the South Pole, and it's essentially the direction of ultimate flow is which one of those polar fields is stronger than the other one. In other words, it's going to be predominantly positive or negative, but there's going to be both things going in both directions with the Earth positive. As the capacitor.
It's actually going to be positive. That makes perfect sense. It should be positive because
it's going to be protons coming out, but there's also going to be a stream of electrons following that.
Oh God, yes. No, the electrons are going to, and of course, we can see the spherules coming out the north and south poles of the sun. That's 100% that we see that. So now, of course, they get pretty faint. They don't we can only see them about maybe, I'd say, maybe 8 or so, maybe as much as 12 solar diameters away from the sun. So that's only the part we can see. If you go further than that, we can't see them anymore. So that
So when
go ahead.
The distance from the sun where Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 passed the Heliopause was how many astronomical units? How many solar distances? Are we talking diameters? Diameters, right?
Oh, yeah. I think if they're past 80 or 90, I'm not sure how far they went. Do you guys know?
It's astronomical units.
I think it was like 120.
120?
AU.
I think Pluto's at 80, I think, max, and or so. So 120?
Yeah, I think it's the 110 to 120 range.
Okay.
Saturn is
110 to 120 AU.
Saturn is 8 AU away.
Yes, and Pluto is AT. Yeah.
Well, all the planets are proportionally spaced if you count in the asteroid belt as a planet.
Quite possible, yes. Most
definitely.
I mean, James would have a wonderful debate, and others have too, of trying to convince me of, or at least to see that there's an order. And in a way, they're not wrong. We've seen with David LaPointe's work that if you change the current going in, and I hate to be quoting him on that, but if we noticed in his manipulation of the two spheres, basically if there's a change in the heliosphere's pressure, it will change the distance of the planets, or it seems to, because it changes the distance of those spheres. That
if
could
you
be
change
correct.
the distance of the fields from each other, or if you change the voltage, it'll change the distance that the planets want to orbit, because there's a repulsive force and an attractive force going on there. Classical astronomy is going to tell you, the planets are held in place simply by gravity and inertia, and that's not true.
No, we see way too many discrepancies nowadays, especially with, oddly, these flyby things themselves. We're sending vehicles around planets, and suddenly they get anomalous accelerations, and they don't understand why. And I'm like, I want to debate it, because I mean, that's where we're going to start seeing crap happen. Not just going to the moon, We're going to occasionally see it when we go to Mars, but Mars is still right up against the anode, effectively. But, I mean, you get to Jupiter. Now, Jupiter's 5 AU away, Saturn's 8. Now you're talking, because, I mean, we're at 1. You know, Mars is, you know, not very far away from us. So we're really close. We're really close to the anode. But if you get further away, the properties of materials are quite possibly different. And that, I mean, it doesn't matter if Jupiter itself is heavy, it'll move. What I mean.
Neil, how do you relate this to the
in any
Sapphire?
case, we should get back to the heliopause, right? Because we're talking about the heliopause distance from the sun.
Correct.
39.5
planetary
AU.
mechanics. How much?
39.5 AU
For
is Pluto.
Okay, so I was half right. But still, 110, that's way out there. So, yes, go ahead.
Wouldn't you agree that the distance of the heliopause at the polar areas would be vastly different at solar minimum versus solar maximum, but not at the equatorial area? Because you've got, you know, of course, it's not going to be exactly like this because these things are going to be curved toward one side or the other side of the Birkeland current that the sun is in.
Oh yeah, and Voyager went down here and here. Like if they went up to this tube, I mean, if they went in the same direction, out the same way, and they happen to be heading towards the most active part of the IBEX scan, then it's quite possible then that we do have a much longer side to the other side, much more egg shaped to it, or elongated on one side. There's no reason to think that we're not. As Jim says, attached to the side of this tube, one of these tubes, and are spinning around it. The Pleiades, I can never say that word correctly. Those stars are right in the middle and seem to have exploded in the recent past, as we can tell by the story of the Argo and Whirlpool Island and the great toroidal events there, of course. So. And we saw that wave coming towards us, but dissipating, and it must have had an effect on our, well, basically just like the bottom image here, how it would have traveled, things would have traveled directly into it and come up, and you know, and that could be what's powering this whole thing. And we got to understand that the sun is really, really, really tiny compared to the overall area of this thing, which is why we don't see the currents easily. They're very diffuse. I mean, we're talking electron per meter, or maybe 3. You know,
the Pleiades are big and blue and hot.
Yes, because they're right in the middle of that friggin' current. They're like a Seyfert galaxy. Like the two currents are just touching in the middle and exploding.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, they're right at the pinch.
Well, in a way, yeah. That's what I'm thinking.
Neil, quickly,
or they're creating the pinch.
Go ahead.
Just wanted to talk about how this relates to the Sapphire project and how elements are organized according to shells, like Monty was talking about on the last show. Well, like, how would you relate this heliopause and the material found there, the charge density, based on Sapphire project?
Well, right here, for example, we're seeing that the effects of the sunspot cycle, the 11 years, well, we're also seeing effects. We'll see changes in currents in that particular layer, but that layer is transferring charge. Just that's why it's moving things from point A to point B. And we happen to have our, whatever the solar influence is, then there's going to be a layer beyond that we seem to find neutral hydrogen there. That's what it seems to be flying through. And that it seemed to be moving, like pumping, like it's not even, there's a wave form to it that seems to be something that the Voyager passed through several times. So I'm saying that's sort of like evidence of the pumping action I was talking about, of the electrons being pumped north and south, if you get my meaning. And then we're going to be going into different layers. Now, there could possibly be, as we've seen around other stars, layer of like cold magnesium, layer of hot calcium, a layer of, you know, now its chances are these are going to be much less diffuse around us, but these are much more diffuse around us than they are around these active stars that we were seeing them at, these stellar nurseries and so forth that Monty was describing. But around Sapphire, we see the same thing. These layers are formed in shells. Now, what does this really mean? Like, I mean, I'm quite positive that kicking, like they didn't kick Sapphire up to the level of what a star could probably do, or even what the sun could do. But what they have found so far has been absolutely amazing on the fact that it allows you to transmute elements, perhaps even to allow you to eject some of them quickly to make it easier on the sun. Like, let's do some fusion here so this thing has something to throw out, you know, because it wants to go down that ramp and travel out and fling it out into space, if you know what I mean.
The note that I wanted to make was the gradiated fall off towards the most dense part of those shells essentially has ramp up and ramp down discharge and elemental construct, right? So if you look at the Sapphire Project shells, you'll see gradation.
Obviously, I was thinking you were
shells.
reaching somewhere else, but please explain.
I just mean like, you know, with the entire model of the toroidal hyperboloid structure, the stuff that Buddy has shown, the fact that you have a nucleus, essentially that everything really looks like a bubble with a tiny dot in the center of it. And as the shells emanate outwards, they organize elements and matter according to these shell densities, right? So that's how I interpret Sapphire. And then you have within these larger things that we're looking at the sun and its influence on the solar system, you have also a gradiated fall off, and then you have a harder switch, which is more of like a phi ratio. So you'll have like a longer gradient towards the most dense part of the shell, and then kind of a quick drop off to the next layer of
yes, that's
protonic density. Proton density.
You're going to have that. Well, obviously, what happens is just like it sort of happens on. It basically, the plasma will wrap around something of a different voltage, and there will be that sharp drop off. Like, you would think that the voltage between the sun and the Earth, or to the solar, where the solar system or the sun solar ends, basically wherever the corona ends, that point to the Earth itself is about 600 volts. That's it. But that's enough of a gradient to keep the acceleration going of over, you know, millions of miles. So we see the acceleration even in 1 AU. However, that gradient, if we plot the voltage difference between the two, we notice that most of the voltage difference expressed starts falling around the Earth itself has a giant magnetosphere, and you start seeing layers around it as it begins to go closer and closer to the ionosphere, and then ultimately through even denser layers it goes to the Earth's surface, which we see as cloud layers, actually, in some cases.
I guess the question that comes to me is like, can we measure what elements occur in Earth's, I guess, shells? Can we measure the amount of hydrogen?
We've only seen the hydrogen, so and
Right.
and it might be blocking our vision of stuff behind it. We don't know, because it will be even more diffuse as it crosses through these layers. Like, each layer will
Right.
get more and more weaker. That's not even a word. Did I say? I didn't think I said that right, but it gets weaker.
Right.
I have a question about the radio signals that we've been pumping out of the Earth's environment for the last 50 years or so. Do you think any of them are going to make it through the heliosphere?
Are you directing that to me?
Anybody?
You mean like our content, media, videos, radio stuff, or
Yeah,
like
our radio
natural
signals that have been leaving since the 30s.
Maybe there's leakage, but my thought is they get trapped.
Is
in the
anybody
layers.
transmitting this?
Huh? What was that, Daniel?
Somebody's transmitting this conversation into outer space, aren't you? You sons of bees.
It's true.
They're on their way.
Never transmit.
Oh, well, each plasma layer boundary is another shell itself. Just like the ionosphere, we could bounce radio waves off of it, and we can get the right frequency on our shortwave. It can go around the planet because it bounces off the plasma in the Earth and bounces off the plasma in the sky and goes right around the Earth. However, each plasma layer that we go through will have a different boundary that it stops certain frequencies. That's just common. Now, I don't know what these frequencies are, and I don't expect them to be incredibly.
Yeah, it'll mess with it.
Well, yeah, each one will be slightly
It'll
block a certain
refract
frequency.
it, reflect it.
Yeah.
How do you think this relates to the cosmic microwave background radiation, the CMB?
God.
Oh,
Like,
no.
is it something? Is this discussion related to how that might be misinterpreted, given that we have these shells that might change the data?
That's
Probably.
kind of where I was going with the question, but good on you, Chris.
You know, Sky Scholar is probably like Robitaille. His theory about it is by far the most compelling, at least especially in conspiratorial ideas. But James, you were going to speak first, so.
No. You were saying exactly what I was going to say. Is the Sky Scholar said that it was the oceans, which kind of goes back to some of the causes of these other things that makes it. I never understand why people, or even in the Electric Universe, they talk about the sun as if it's not connected to a Birkeland current. I don't understand that. The other thing is that the transmutations that are occurring on the surface of the sun, that's what's causing the corona. It's not the galactic circuit. It's not, it's independent of it. And I've been always saying constantly, but nobody listens or cares or understands. Maybe even I don't, that the atmosphere of the Earth is causing some flares of the sun. So atmospheres cause interactions that are not connected to the Birkeland current interactions and all that kind of stuff. But
well, yeah, because they're voltages, and they're going to, yeah, it's just like that. We were talking about why is it passing through this weird fiery flame that changes potentials? Well, that's very similar to prominences. They're sort of it's trying to transfer energy across this boundary, and it has different potentials to go through. But obviously, down near the surface of the sun, they're giving off a lot of energy, and of course, that energy can be felt from the Earth and has a big effect on it. So we're not that far. We're not that far from the sun. That's all I'm saying.
Apparently, neither are the Pleiades causing the waggling of the Mercury.
Is that what's happening? Is that what they say?
That's what the ancients say. Yeah.
That's kind of messed up because I didn't hear that before. I do know that there's a Mercury anomaly. I don't understand it enough to explain it. So I do know that it is enough that I know that they're glossing over, because almost every time you get an anomaly, you know it's an anomaly because it's evidence of another theory in most cases. So.
Well, that's why I suggested, or Tess actually thought of it first, is that the Earth is part of that's one of the seven sisters, and that's why we're connected or something.
Yeah, Tess, did you talk to that, or? He's probably.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Finding where to click to unmute myself. Yes. Well, the Mayans said that the solar system was orbiting Alcyone, which is one of the Pleiades, or the seven sisters. So I guess that would make 8 of the stars of the system of the Pleiades. And I hadn't heard that specific story, but I wouldn't be surprised because they were really important. And now I also shared a little bit of history here from the Legends of the Jews, talking about Pleiades. I don't know what you think about this, but I thought it was interesting.
Right.
It says that during the deluge, when the deluge began, many things happened. The sun was darkened. There was earthquakes, lightning bolts, thunder. The rain was boiling, and And then it says the water from above came in through the space left when God removed 2 stars from the Pleiades and gave them to the Bear constellation. So they saw this happening, and I thought that was interesting. I should tell you guys soon. Because you were talking about the exploding of the Pleiades, and I thought, well, something big happened here, that they had it in this legend.
It would be to blow 2 stars up, and then to brighten 2 other stars in another constellation. That's not that's not
They
impossible.
saw them moving. Mhm.
It's because, I mean, of course, currents can jump. And usually when they do something like that, you can have massive shocks as shorts happen. And of course,
Right.
we do
Right.
have this message of the whirlpool occurring and the ship getting caught in the whirlpool, the Argo, and so on, expanding out from there as this Gould belt, this ring expanded outwards. So it was certainly something that they were probably watching and must have had an effect on the Earth. It could have been at that time that, again, we suffered a change in, well, everything, in the sense of things that used to happen don't happen again because of the changes of properties of materials, like gravity changes or so forth. But anyway.
Well, what happened when all of that energy that was expanding outward touched our sun's heliosphere? Things got a little crazy, maybe.
Well, it has to process all those electrons. Yes, it certainly does. It can't not do that. I mean, it's often said that you can sort of like overcharge something, and that's not really true. You can in Star Trek, but in real life, the resistances, the impedances control how much current's flowing through it, and that's it. It will if you lower the impedance, it will take as much as you can give it, and that's why you get high-powered things, So. Like stereos and stuff. I'm still looking for this image. Was it the antenna one here? Not sure if this was the one.
Oh, actually, I just remembered something important about the Mayans and the Pleiades.
Of course.
And Alcyon. Can I add it while you find your websites? Excellent. Yes, they said that the great year that Plato called the great year was the orbit of the sun around Alcyon, and it lasted approximately between 24,000 to 26,000 years, and due to orbital changes of the sun. Just I didn't explain why, but it was variable, and that would explain the precession of the equinoxes. That's what caused the precession of the equinoxes, because we are spinning, like Rick was saying, in this corkscrew manner.
Yeah, up the pipe.
So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
They also knew that. They also had that data.
And that totally
makes sense. It's a 26,000 year cycle.
Yes, 26,000, which is the precession of the equinoxes. That's what causes a precession.
Well, it's actually 25,800 or something like that.
It doesn't matter.
It can vary. Yeah, it has varied throughout time. That's why they said between this and that.
That actually makes sense too, because if the current changes, the speed of rotation changes, because the force, if you use the right-hand rule, the force of the sun around this pipe will, as it's attached to it, will be related to the current and the voltage. And of course, if you have that, you will get the spin, and it's spinning the entire galaxy along here. Now, it's not directly connected, but that makes perfect sense that there is a wobble and that it's moving. And it's pulling it up the chain, just like blood, if you would, in a blood vessel, as it sort of gets pulled through a really tight blood vessel, so to speak.
Right.
Corkscrewing itself along, as it were.
I think you're making a good point about this. Is really fluid dynamics is a better way to look at most of this stuff.
Well, yes, but not the fluid dynamics that they use. That's the big problem, because they basically go, there's no resistance. That's basically
they're special.
Yeah. But by having no resistance, they say, what's the difference if it makes no resistance? Is because you're doing that to make the math easier. But once you add resistance, then suddenly you have polarities. You have the sun having a charge, and then you suddenly have an electric field and all that kind of stuff. Well, it's simplified. It's simplified. Looking at the magnetic fields only is what they're trying to do. Anyway, go ahead, Jim or James.
Yeah, no, that sounds exactly like the dead gravity, which is non-resist or non-charged gravity. Like there's can be a polarity without charge, and then
I know,
the
eh?
whole thing. This is
how can you
this is
have a
just
polarity? And, well, they
crazy.
had to bend space. They literally had to bend space and time to fit that friggin' theory in there. And there were people like Schrodinger and other ones who were going, "You guys need to f right off because you guys have no idea what you're talking about."
And they're doing
And,
the same thing.
I mean,
with,
Maxwell
the
is just
rotation of the
rotating
Earth.
in his grave like a
Oh, yeah.
like a homopolar motor, just like that. Like,
You
I
just
mean,
gotta laugh at standard scientific theories. Some
Well,
of them
no,
are just outrageous,
well,
but
they
some of
just
them are good.
like you cannot violate other scientific theories in your scientific theory. That's just you can't do
doing
that.
the same
Oh, that's
thing.
a bad no.
They're doing the same thing with the eclipses in the past because they're saying that the Earth's rotation hasn't changed significantly. They're talking like microseconds almost, perfectly from the whole time. And the moon has everything is perfect. So that's the only way you can do the math. You can't predict past eclipses without that being true, and it's not.
Well, and we've also talked about this before about the potentials that this is. I thought I had another message. Anyway, the potentials that this is actually. Okay, apparently I've lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, James. I was sitting there like I had.
We actually have over 70 people on YouTube
watching
listening
me
in.
lose my entire train of thought. That's good.
No, it's been wonderful, and there's some great comments if you'd like. I could share it.
Please do. This is a good opportunity because we're trying to figure out basically how does this connect. Now, one of the things that they were talking about, you were talking about the CMBs. This particular video here, he's talking about how it was found and that
Yes.
they were seeing that because they used this reflector, this is why they saw the discrepancies, because they basically were seeing microwave reflections from the ocean. And
It's the Haruni antenna. Yes.
that's the one. Yes, good. And they showed in this particular one, I'm not going to go through it, but I just wanted to let everyone know that basically they sent one into space to do the exact same test. And amazingly enough, no one could ever find the paper about the report because they literally kept it as paper. They never put it on the internet. So no one could ever download it because it was never put on. But that particular paper says we found SFA with regards to any sort of cosmic microwave background. SFA, like that's the scientific term meaning sweet FA. Yeah, that's what it was. Okay, they had no, like, seriously, nothing. And they were like, huh, well, the Earth is glowing with the shit, though, because, because the oceans. Oops.
There are definitely microwaves to be measured in space. However, there's no kind of homogeneous signal nonsense as purported by mainstream science. There is no kind of signal that you can go measure and go, oh, here's this mysterious microwave signal. It simply doesn't exist. And if you go to Lagrange point, the one behind the Earth, it's, let's just say, also not measurable there. It's
so basically
smash.
This Penzias is basically still alive, so they buried it for him.
Yes,
And when he dies, they will change over and admit that they've done this. This is what they do.
Not the antenna.
When he found out what he found out, I believe Smash, you can verify this. His funding was pulled.
The guy who did
Oh,
it?
geez.
No, that was
I can't verify. I don't have enough funding to verify
They
it.
sent a spacecraft. They sent a spacecraft out into space. That's the one that verified nothing. Now, I don't think that they could
Brilliant.
they can cover it up by just not publishing the paper, but they can't deny it because it's probably sent up by the ESA or something, and way too many people have access, right? And you can't just,
Hey,
that
brings up a good point, too. Isn't Robitaille trying to resurrect this antenna? Where is it, in Armenia or something?
It is. And
Isn't he trying to resurrect it? That's still a thing, right?
It's number one, it's for sale. And number two, it would be totally awesome to get, like, the Electric Universe people, like, would you like to buy a castle so we can do some research in Armenia? Why, yes, we would.
Yes, please.
I mean, talk about an Oppenheimer project out there, eh?
I'm in. Let's do it.
It's like,
I'll move.
what's all that green stuff that you put around the antenna to shield it, to shield the microwaves?
Can we have somebody besides me in
those
charge
are
of security?
tomato plants. Anyway, what? Oh yes, you in
But,
charge
you
of
know,
security? No.
Yeah. This kind of reminds me of Monty's talk last episode when we were talking about organizations and their resistance to change.
Yes.
And there was the competition, the intensity was so hard I couldn't get in to suggest and tell that the herd mentality is the followers are
Groupthink,
the majority. Yeah. And so your consensus is filled up with mostly herd people, and they are there to protect the privilege of the leadership to have the privileges of making the changes when they want to make the changes. That's what the consensus is there for. It's not to put their feet to the fire. It's to make sure that their leadership privileges are enforced, and they're so that they don't lose their budgetary
But it's
means
just
in a way that
natural.
they don't want to.
Like, I'm not trying to be.
Exactly.
It is a natural situation. It's not something that you see, and institutions only discovered these things in the 1930s, well after, the Big Bang and all that was already being hammered out. This is, the institutions have no protection against groupthink. They're built on it, not against it. Like, that's how things get done, if you know what I mean. So, anyway, not to stifle that conversation, please go ahead, McDuff.
Duff, yes. Oh, and Duff, if you would mention a few names of the Pepples that are commenting, that would be great.
Well, I certainly can. Holloway Arts says, if our sun is part of a binary system, wouldn't it be able to tell by the shape of that heliosphere? Can we determine the shape of the heliosphere by using Voyager probes?
Well, you'd only see the two parts that it went through. And we can see the neutral hydrogen from the IBEX satellite around in a ring. So that lends credence to the homopolar motor idea, obviously. But as to, that's a great debate for us to understand. Like, Jim is a big proponent that it's a cometary, that it's just like our heliopause, I believe he was saying. I don't want to be incorrect. Can anyone paraphrase Jim? Who was, I wasn't here to read it all. I just saw it when it was flowing by as I was running to my house.
Your voice is velvetier than mine.
I just didn't read it, so unfortunately it's in the chat somewhere. That's all. I just don't want to. But if anyone could paraphrase
We have some additional comments if you want me to go on, or we can stay with this.
No, go ahead. I'm sure that we'll have to make sure that I just don't want to
people talking.
Don't want to mispronounce.
now.
Don't want to piss off Jim. Is all I'm saying. Anyway, go on.
Cool. So, Marky Boy McGill, one of the theories say that we don't have solid core but gassy liquid plasma, perhaps with plasmoid at the center of it. I think he's asking us to comment on
the Earth, the sun,
theory.
or both. Because I think that I would say that it's quite. I mean,
I feel like he was talking about the Earth, but I don't know. It's a good question. I don't see. He's not made the distinction here. Marky Boy, you gotta nail it down, bro.
Well, no, I mean, there has to be a reason why the sun and the Earth has magnetic fields, and why Jupiter and Saturn and so forth, why they have magnetic fields, why some don't, why does Mars not, why is Mercury's weak, why does Venus have none, does it take time for them to form, does it spool up, all that kind of thing. We're just not privileged yet to figure that part out. I'm not against the idea of the sun's core being hollow, although I don't think it's gaseous. Some people have different arguments about what it's made of, but I'm of the opinion that the properties of matter are such that when it's that charged, it weighs physically less. The mass is physically less, and the sun might just be made of the same material as everything else, and it's possible that would. I mean, with of course, the cooking aspect of nuclear fusion occurring and fission, of course, notwithstanding. But it's really hard to tell. It's really
Tess
unfortunate.
has also got some real hardcore appreciators here in the comments.
Oh,
Kronos says, I would enjoy a discussion on Osiris. It's one of my favorite subjects. And Ether Revival says, ask Tess about Osiris. So I don't know if Tess is still listening, but you've got some fans out there
they're demanding things
in the YouTube universe. And the electric tubes love you.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. Do you want me to talk about Osiris now or in a little bit? Okay. Well, I also had a question before I get into it. You just mentioned that you think the sun, this is for Neil, that the sun is hollow. Planets would be the same. You mentioned that there's a plasmoid inside of the Earth that or you believe that it's growing. Do you think that it's possible for a planet, and that would be, for example, Venus, because we know Venus came allegedly from Saturn,
right?
Or Jupiter, as the myth goes, but probably from Saturn, that it could actually turn back into a star if that plasmoid got big enough? What do you think about that? Any thoughts?
Well, it was probably positively charged, mostly because of the material that was ejected out. So it took a while to neutralize, all the way up, as we've seen flare-ups that would come and go, even after it officially turned off permanently. So it stopped glowing. It get a great big huge brightness that came out at I think it was 685 BC or something, and then that was when Lucifer challenged God for rule of the sky, and God, the sun, was like, you're nothing. And he popped out. Mm-hmm. Now, that was the end of that. But occasionally, as you had said, it must have came back. It flared up occasionally. And we've seen evidence that these things had turned on occasionally at certain times when they crossed the ecliptic and so forth, so that people were waiting for it. They were looking for those. So it's quite possible that you're as you said, there were other events of Venus into much more modern times. But
wouldn't a large CME brighten Venus?
Well, you're getting the idea. Anything could do it. But Venus right now is invisible mostly. We see the aurora covers the whole thing. Now, it's still quite positively charged, and it's not really spinning. It doesn't have a magnetic field. So my question becomes, how does that form? I can imagine that it's something that must form naturally, and 40% of all of them should have one, because that seems to be the case when we're looking at these things that we make in the laboratory. 40% of them are hollow, and when we cut them in half, which, by the way, I don't know if it's actually closer to, because that's the golden ratio of 60-40. You know what I mean? 61-40-39. You know what I'm talking about? So that's right in there. So I don't know if that plays a part, but it wouldn't surprise me. So here we are looking at how often it should occur.
Thank you.
So you're looking at around 40%. So that means 40% of all the planets and all the stars should be hollow, if that's the case. But can it happen later? Does this hollowness, is it a requirement for a magnetic field? We know that there are surface situations on Mars. We don't.
That's a good question.
Well, yeah, because then you have.
I've been wondering about that.
Well, you have plasmoids stuck in the center of a planet, and it's able to rotate. Now, it's not in the center of Uranus; it's off to one side, and it seems to be closer to the surface and to one. But maybe because it's been angled so much and stuck here for so long that it's literally liquefying that area. Okay, now once it can form a space and it gets a vapor going, then you have an empty hole. Now once the empty hole is there, you're going to have a positive charge on that surface. Whatever the surface charge of the entire Earth is, you will have expressed in the middle of that empty pocket. So this is why I think there's a plasmoid there, because immediately you're going to see a magnetic field form and all the other wonderful stuff that goes with that. And can it begin to push upon itself?
The heat.
No, I mean, no, not even heat. I mean the positive force of that entire thing pressing against an open cavity on the other side. Well, we see what one electron can do. I mean, I have no doubt it could push a planet apart. Why? What would stop it? I mean, one electron is the four against another electron. You'd have to use 50,000 tanks worth of weight to push those two things together. So if you're talking about the entire surface charge of the planet Earth in Q expressed as Q coulombs inside of the planet Earth, then yeah, the pressure on the other side of that thing would be way more than the planet is heavy. Like, I mean, we could push the sun apart. Like, seriously, right. I'm not kidding. So this is why I have it. I mean, think about it. Think about how one electron is. I mean, think about all of the coulombs of the entire planet expressed on the inside of that surface. It's going to push across it with immense force. Like force which God has never seen.
I can hear Wallace in the back of my head saying 100 or 1,000 billion times stronger than gravity.
Yeah, you're getting the idea. So so the amount of mass that the Earth is, we would fracture it and start pushing this liquid up through the cracks. And I think it goes all the way up until it hits water. Once water from the surface begins to come down and hits that, then they neutralize and stuff starts happening. But, because you're starting to see reactions of these particular materials, and you're going to have boundary layers. And as we know, where there's a boundary layer, that's where electrical activity likes to express itself. So, could there be fusion going on inside the Earth at that particular layer? I have no doubt cool stuff would be happening. So I'm not trying to tell you I know exactly what's going on, but I mean, I'm just following the mentality of electrical engineering. So
a sound theory for where all the electrons are coming from. There are a lot of electrons, and where are they coming from? If there's a plasmoid inside the Earth, much like the one inside the sun, then that would be a good explanation for where all those electrons are coming from.
Well, yeah, and it would be an exact duplicate of all of the entirety of the atmosphere's activity expressed inside that area, inside that small little cavity. Like the entirety of the activity of the surface of the Earth would be expressed there. So it's just like the heliopause, because remember, this is a series circuit. It only goes in one direction, so every single thing in the chain must express the same thing, because it's series. It's not parallel. I mean, the planets are parallel to each other, but they're in series with we're in series with our magnetosphere, period. You know what I mean? Like we are. So whatever's happening up there and through the atmosphere must occur inside the planet. So the thicker it gets, the denser it gets. So we're talking about the entirety of everything that happens from here to the moon and back and out towards the orbit of Mars being expressed in the area of 1,500 meters or kilometers. Very small area, the inner core. So yeah, there's a lot of fun going to happen in there. I'm sure of it.
May I jump in here for a sec, Neil?
I think I'm done.
Not to derail Tess's discussion of Osiris, but I wanted to mention, I think it's relevant that Pierre-Marie Robitaille talks about the sun as a liquid metallic hydrogen construct on the surface of the sun, the actual surface.
I wasn't going to dispute that, although I'm not a fan. I know he has reason to believe that, and I would never dismiss him out of hand.
Well, it seems pretty, to me personally, it seems obvious because we observe the sun using hydrogen alpha filters, right? 720 nanometers. And when you look at the sun with these filters, you can see liquid metallic hydrogen basically behaving using computational fluid dynamics. So you see essentially the interaction between the chromosphere, the gradiated fall off of the chromosphere, which extends way past what we see on the surface of the sun, versus the movement of liquid metallic hydrogen as
we see
denoted
ripples,
by
we see a surface, like an ocean.
We see a surface,
rock,
exactly. Yeah. No. So my question here Yeah, my question here is kind of like, how does that relate to Donald Scott's model? How does it relate to the Sapphire Project in terms of the relational qualities with temperature and density of the chromosphere in relation to the surface of the sun? Do you believe the sun has a surface? And
Yes.
if the sun is hollow or not, or semi-hollow, is the center kind of why is the center colder or perceived colder?
Well, that's the surface of the planet. Yeah. The surface of the Earth is like what, 7 degrees on average compared to the thermosphere, which is 1,500 degrees. So it's like the corona versus you go down to 2,000 degrees. Yes, it's melting rock or whatever. But I'm also wondering if this metallic hydrogen aspect to it is not actually a false mental image. And the reason I don't like, because of this charge and the gravity of this situation, literally, it's quite possible that any metal down there, for example, if the surface was iron, okay, let's just say molten iron, okay, because that's quite possible it is, because we see sort of things that might indicate that. Now, maybe it is covered in a layer of liquid metallic hydrogen welded to it, and this is literally flowing just like surface tension. I mean, we got to understand that we're almost incapable of even rationalizing what we're looking at, because we can't envision. Like, I'm trying to mentally envision the standing on the surface of the sun and imagining being on like an invincible boat and floating there and trying to figure out what this thing is, like what's going on right here, you know, and what's going on just 10 meters above my head and so forth. Because each one of these, I mean, you're talking about like we're right on the surface. Like, there's billions of volts being expressed here of of gradients here. So there's the forces are, well, otherworldly, literally. Like, I can't even I can't even.
What about the surface of the sun being a concentrated plasma that behaves like a liquid metal hydrogen?
Sure.
But you were saying, Chris?
No, I was just saying there's evidence for transverse wave functions on the surface of the sun. Oh
yes, there's ripples.
So yeah. So do you have any thoughts, or anybody have any thoughts on how we can, because I think people in the chat room and me, as one of those people, how does that reconcile with Donald Scott's model and Dr. Pierre-Marie Robitaille's model?
Actually, it's
in conjunction with all the other. It's really about converging all these ideas, right?
Well, it's about finding the right one. And I'm not trying to dissuade it. Whatever evidence is discussed there with Pierre Robitaille, like I said, I would not dismiss it. I've seen his video. It was too long ago for me to perfectly discuss it, but I know that he had some points where I was like, but could that be explained by this? But one of the problems is that the sun and the gas giants are of different mass. We think that the sun of the center of the Earth must be a piece of iron because we weigh so much. So this discrepancy is what we make, like we have put our theory onto the planet Earth and said this. But what we're seeing, as we've explored in this discussion before, that the materials, the properties of matter, can change in different electrical environments, which might explain why giant rocks were used and now smaller rocks are used and so forth. And perhaps maybe certain metals were stronger and now are weaker because environment has changed. The electrical properties or the properties of materials have changed because the electrical properties of the Earth have changed. Well, the sun is incredibly highly charged, and it appears to be made of hydrogen, and that's why we say that. But I mean, we do see hydrogen come off of it. Let's not argue. Okay. Let's not
to be fair, though,
but is the sun?
So you use
the sun highly charged? Or is the part you can measure highly charged, or is there just a massive amount of electrons available for when you measure it?
It would be the gradient.
Think it's highly charged.
It would be the gradient with the highest electric field. Therefore, everything's flowing towards it. Plus, it has a magnetic field, so everything is doubly flowing towards it. So, you know what I mean? Like it's definitely the nexus here, and we're definitely feeding off of that through the solar wind. But what I meant was, and you're not wrong in asking that question, but what is the layer? Is this layer the exact surface of the sun and so forth? We do see different filters see different things. Some people,
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Calcium K sees the prominences, right?
right?
So if you use a calcium bandwidth, then you can see those versus a hydrogen bandwidth to see the
And
actual
this is
surface
more the
convection.
Sapphire project
Or is
layering.
the sun
This is
surface
pretty
just
typical.
making hydrogen?
Well, that's the bands of basically seeing the different parts of the sun is pretty standard solar cosmology and solar astronomy. So,
Yeah.
but in relation to watching these new videos, you can kind of see how it might be organized. And then, of course, the kind of larger thing is like why the chromosphere is much hotter and why sunspots that should lead to the sun's core are much colder than they should be.
Well, actually,
So
see the pattern's actually describing this right here in the double layer, but charges are kept apart, but there's a flow to them. Like there's actually a boundary, and the pressure on the surface of the sun. Anytime an electron gets free, for even a second, once this sorry, not electron, a proton, like a hydrogen, gets free in an action, and gets caught just above the surface, it's going to get flung down that gradient and shot out in space, and that's the solar wind. So we're seeing this phenomenon occurring. Now, of course, there's an electric field there. Now, what we're asking though is, why are we seeing different layers of the sun? Now, in Donald Scott's model, he talks, and even Robitaille has a thing on this as well about the HR diagram. In the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, basically they're talking about the age of stars, but Donald Scott thinks it has to do with current at the surface of the star. Now, per square meter, basically. So what is your current per square meter over the surface of this ball? If it hits a certain point, the star will fission. Now, he talks about that in purely electrical terms. He doesn't discuss what the star will weigh or appear to weigh. That's just not part of electrical engineering yet. Believe it or not, only we are talking about that. I don't think there's almost anybody if you talk about this to anywhere else in the world, they go, you're smoking crack, you're fired. That's what they're going to say, unless you're Russian, maybe, So, sorry, Sean, see you later. But so that's my thoughts on that. I think that the properties of charge are such that they affect mass, and that the sun might not be different than any other body in the solar system. We see other bodies that seem to be a product of two or more unions, or pepper sprayed with debris or their interactions, but we can basically start telling their parentage and where they came from, if we think about it, because they're going to have internal and external properties once we get a look at them, and we can see what they're coated with, because if they're an interaction between two bodies, one's going to be, the inside of one body is going to be charged with the material from one planet and covered with the material of another planet. And that'll show that they were a product of those two planets. So, but do we actually have the ability to do this yet? No. So I can't deny that Pierre Robitaille might be right. I really can't deny that, is what I'm saying. I would listen to what he has to say.
Perhaps you're saying he's right.
No, I don't think he is, though. I think Donald Scott is right. Electrically speaking, I'm 100% thinking that the properties of matter are such that these balls will happen because of electrical reasons. Now, what the balls are made of or what they cook into, I don't know. There's some thoughts on that.
All of those magnets, all they really need to be is magnets moving through an electrical field. So if they're all balls of liquid metallic hydrogen, which is something you just said, maybe they're all made out of the same plasmoids, aka liquid metallic hydrogen.
Well, why are all the planets rocks? Then?
All they need is to have massive electron availability and be moving through an electrical field.
Well, you're right. You described a star. I'm totally cool with that. But what I'm saying is that Jupiter and Saturn were both stars for previous time, when they were when times were different, we'll say. But does it mean that these two things are different? I just think that they're large, because they will have the largest electric field and magnetic field, and therefore will attract the most electrons. And that's
I
how
thought
that
that
will
you
work.
just interpolated that all the way down to the size of the Earth, where you're saying the Earth is made out of the same kind of plasmoid as the sun.
No,
I
I'm
thought you were
saying
going
that
one step farther than
I'm
that.
saying that the Earth, the materials that the Earth are, or that Mars are, should be the same as what Saturn and Jupiter and the Sun are. I think that they should all be homogeneous relatively. They should be
Yeah, I
made
think
of the same things.
I think that
is what I'm saying.
that might be the
That's
kind
my
of thing that
thoughts.
proves Robitaille.
Well, yeah, there could be something like that going inside the Earth. I don't know, but I don't. I would think that if, like, for example, if I took the Earth right now and I, let's say I imagine that I go, I do the Tony Stark thing where I go, okay, I'm going to look at an image of the solar system. I'm going to Tony Stark my hand in. I'm going to grab the Earth. I'm going to pluck it out and throw the other solar system parts away, and then say, okay, now the heliopause is there and the Earth is at the center. What happens? The Earth now has to process all of these electrons.
Huh?
How hot will the sun get?
You're removing everything from the solar system, including the sun, but the Earth.
Right. So all
right,
the no. Just
that's
think
a little
about,
bit beyond.
No. Just if you think about it, if we have the heliopause and all the activity therein, and we've already said that all of the planets,
You would become gaseous.
I think
what
you
would
would.
happen.
Yeah, I think you would explode. Yes, I totally think that we would shotgun into a million little tiny pieces. But it's possible that
Oh, you just heat up so fast you'd become a gas. You wouldn't shotgun. You would become a gas.
no, you short out. Yeah, there's no possible way you'd survive that. I don't think. But if
there'd be no particles. You'd just be a gas.
well,
you would sublimate.
it wouldn't be a gas thing. It would be electrical breaking down into tiny, tiny little balls. But that's what makes binaries and trinaries. But the Jupiter and Saturn, Uranus and Neptune, those four balls together, if we remove the sun from the equation, just the sun, well then all of the sun's energy now has to be expressed across all of those planets. So all of them are going to crank up. Now, the ones that are going to crank up the most are the ones that are the largest. So Jupiter should crank up the most, and then Saturn should crank up the next most, and then so on with the gas giants. But they should all start glowing. So why, if they start glowing, because electrically speaking, they're going to start glowing, the aurora will cover the whole surface and will just begin to glow, and you'll have coronas, and these things will go into arc mode, and that's what they're doing. So we will now be existing in that and seeing them do that thing there. Well, then what makes it, they're not liquid metallic hydrogen, and we're going to start glowing. So we're not liquid metallic hydrogen, we're just rocks and mountains and so forth. So
That's true. We're not liquid metallic hydrogen. But what if a comet? What if the reason that a comet has this bilobed appearance is because it's made of liquid metallic hydrogen? It's got two dipole fields.
I'm with that.
In any case, it's very tough. It's very tough for me to envision what would happen if we made the sun vanish out of the solar system. That's a steep bill.
Well, I just meant electrically because it's processing all these electrons. So naturally, it's a very large load. I mean, look how bright it is.
Yeah, it's also supplying electrons and it's also processing protons.
Well,
Because the
of course,
majority of the galactic wind,
okay.
just like the solar wind, is made of protons.
Let me clarify that too. Plasma has both things in it because the particles, like in a wire, the positive charges are held fast. They can't budge. They're in a lattice. And
right. Otherwise, the electrons would have nothing to rotate around.
You're getting the idea. Exactly. Well, in this particular case, the hydrogen or positive are free to flow. Same with the electrons, which are quite possibly not even existent. They're just like charges that are in between these. As we've said, we had this issue before of wondering, like does the asteroid belt with all its bodies in it constitute a bunch of positive charges, and therefore the negative space between them indicates that that's a ring current. You know what I mean? Like, because
geez.
But if
one side of them is positive, but one side's probably negative, just like the moon. The sun-facing side's probably positive, and the non-sun facing side's probably negative, just like on the moon.
Well, I think it would probably go with the solar wind and probably rotate along with that, and sort of like that's what will create the current, if you know what I mean, going around in a circle. because that's what will have to happen. It will have to continue going around in a big circle.
But if the sun vanished, it would change the entire orientation on the solar system's
Oh my God, yes! But I was only
scenario
speaking
on the Birkeland current, so it would be a lot
electrically.
more than just how everything would continue to behave. Everything would turn into a bag of gravel instead of what it looks like now, pretty much.
Oh my God! It would. It should. Like if it can no longer process the electrons, like for example, if we turn the sun up to kept turning more and more electrons up, or per the current per square meter on the surface of the sun. If we turning it up and up and up, eventually it will hit blue-white. It's as much current as it could possibly process. If we turn it up even more, the sun must increase its surface area, and therefore it will start barfing out parts of itself to make other stars and planets, so it could begin to process more and more electrons. Because that's what it has to do. And if it has to, it will blast itself into little tiny pieces, which is exactly what happens with, well, we see comets or meteorites do it all the time when they hit a certain point.
This is the question that I had for Monty, which I didn't give him a proper question to answer. So I was trying to see why he said that the comet was doing something that it could only happen in a plasmoid. And I was trying to say, well, that makes the dead gravity attraction model impossible. But he didn't go there. He didn't understand my question. So I was thinking about this is all about individual things having their own cell or their own plasma sheath or whatever this whole thing is. And so since it has its own plasmoid, one of the legends about the Earth is that it was much, much bigger. I mean, very much bigger. And that when it got out of the environment of the purple dawn around Saturn, it shrank. And then that's what caused all the springs to just explode, and the water springs to go out and flood everything, which wasn't that difficult to do because the mountains were 15 cubics high, about 22 and a half feet. So it flooded everything. But whatever those numbers are in reality or whatever. But the thing of it is that you could have I think he was saying is that you could have inside your own cell, Saturn's own cell. You can protect the stuff that's inside of it.
Yes. And
that makes it possible for the comet to go on and do it itself without exploding and being turned into dust. And this is kind of like when you're talking about a hollow body, you're really talking about there's a hollow cavity inside, and then the shell is 2,000. Our shell is 2,000 miles wide, but it's split into two things. It's a double layer, and so the current's running down the middle of that 1,000 miles below, exactly where the moon happens to be orbiting the sun, the Earth, and so. And then you were talking about the forces which is kind of what I wanted to jump in on earlier on, is that the ancients make it very clear that the rotation rate of the Earth, the daily rotation of the Earth itself is the standard period of measurement. That's what you do everything on. Nothing else is. Things will vary, but that won't. And what you were talking about, how it was strong, I mean, just you can't stop it. It's gonna rotate, and it's gonna rotate in a constant manner. No matter, it's the most standard thing that you could possibly use for time measurement. And
well, there's a lot of math there, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there is, because there's
gyroscopically speaking, I mean.
So. Right, and then go back to Tesla's point about whatever that Tesla point was. Thank you.
We're going to talk about Osiris, I believe. So that was a big roundabout back to there. Yes. Wow.
That was good.
That was good. I didn't even see where that went. Yeah. Go ahead, Tess. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to just read a little bit about the writings of Diodorus, who is historian. I'm not going to read too much. Don't worry. And if you get you want to cut me I think it's really interesting. So I think
Oh
you're
no
gonna
no
like
no 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 no! I'm not. I'm
It's
not that
very
kind of person.
juicy.
So yeah,
It's really juicy.
you can read a phone book.
So,
Don't worry about it.
so I put the link right on the chat, but I can ask somebody, or I just put it myself on the chat afterwards, so they can click. Whomever wants to go and click on
I'm already there.
the website, they can, and then they can read, and then they can continue reading because it's really interesting. Now, this is a historian who lived over 2,000 years ago. I think he lived he passed away 30 BC. So he must have gone, he said, around the time of the 132nd Olympiad, which is a time of Ptolemy, which is around 60 BC. He went to Egypt and he went to different countries. He was from Sicily, I believe. He went and spoke to the high priests of each country or territory and asked them questions about their history. So this is how he got this information. He didn't just sit and write it, out of a book. He went in person with other people. And so he says, this is Diodorus Siculus' Library of History, Book 1. And he also, by the way, he has really interesting books also on India, the history of India, which I hadn't read until today. I started reading it. It's really fascinating. The history of Greece, the ancient history, the history of Egypt. And he goes into Chaldea and Babylon as well. And not Sumeria, unfortunately, but at least he has those histories. And then he has excerpts of books that are lost or allegedly lost that we can't read, but at least there is that. So it's interesting. And he doesn't talk about catastrophism. He doesn't say anything about that, but he does say a lot about the rulers, the gods, and their history. And so this is from the book 1 of the Egyptian history.
Okay.
So he says, now the men of Egypt, when ages ago they came into existence, as they look up at the firmament and were struck with both awe and wonder at the nature of the universe, conceived that the two gods were both eternal and first, namely, they name them the sun and the moon, whom they called respectively Osiris and Isis. For when the names are translated into Greek, Osiris means many-eyed, and properly so. And he goes to say how he thinks is like the sun, but he didn't know that back then we probably were not orbiting our current sun. So that doesn't, you have to dismiss when these historians are comparing it to Apollo, our current sun.
Right, of course.
So he just says it means that he had many rays and that's many eyes. Then he goes to say, or they say, the sun who sees all things and hears all things. This is how they described Osiris. So I think it's interesting. The sun who sees all things and hears all things. So that's where the term, the all-seeing, all-seeing and all-knowing, right, comes from. The ancient Greek writers of mythology, some give to Osiris the name Dionysius, or with a slight change in form, Sirius. And look at the name, Osiris, cities. So they just move the O and it's cities or Sirius, which they always change a little bit the words. One of them, Eumolpus, in Bacchae hymns says, our Dionysius, shining like a star with fiery eye in every ray. Orpheus refers to Osiris, and this is why men call him the Shining One and Dionysius. Definition of deity or God is the Shining One. Some of them, which is also used by the Sumerians, that's very interesting. They use for their gods, the Shining Ones, they call them. Some of them give the story that at first gods and heroes, who were half human and half gods, that's the heroes, ruled Egypt for a little less than 18,000 years, where 1 year was 1 month. And Diodorus and Manetho have gone into this and explained that their year wasn't a year, a solar year that they knew, but it was a month. And then 18,000 years would be 18,000 months divided by 12, which is what we have as a year now. That would make 1,500 years.
But
so that makes sense.
But wasn't it 10 then, though? Didn't they only have 10 months in a year? Like I mean, before Julius Caesar did his
Well,
thing.
that's the thing. They only had the moon to go by, so we can only calculate according to what we consider the year, the solar year, because they didn't have a solar year. They only had the moon as a measurement. Well, and the heliacal rise of Sirius, for example, because they didn't have the sun, a constant sun to measure time by. So they measure time according to the moon. But anyways, I just wanted to specify that he goes into that in the book, and they can read that when he explains that it's not a year like our year. It's a month, 1 month. So yeah, it could have been 30-day or a 25-day month. And he explains later on their calendars. He goes into all the calendars. So it's very interesting. There's a lot of information.
I'm just looking at some parts right here that blew my mind. It goes, then Kronos became the ruler, and upon marrying his sister
I was going to get
Rhea.
into that. Yeah, exactly. He talks about that. So let me continue. The last of the gods to rule being Horus, the son of Isis. Now, these are the pre-flood gods, the big flood. He says then there's a flood.
The Titans,
and the
we'll call them.
And the mortals have been kings over their country for a little less than 5,000 years, down to the 180th Olympiad. So that makes sense. 5,000 years after the flood. So he's counting. There's been 5,000 years of mortals ruling, which started with the god Menes. I'm sorry, the pharaoh Menes or Menas. That's 5,000 years. And before that, 1,500 years, approximately that time, if you count 10 or 12 months per year. And that mortals have been kings. Okay, so I already said that. Then he goes to say, of Osiris, the fourth pre-flood ruler, he's the fourth to rule. He said, I am the eldest son of Kronos. Osiris was the first ruler, they record, to make mankind give up cannibalism.
Yes, I saw that part. I was like, what?
Exactly. After Isis had discovered both wheat and barley, which grew wild over the land, but was still unknown to mankind, allegedly. I guess they just started doing the agriculture, and then that's how he puts it. Osiris devised the cultivation of these.
Kind of makes sense when you think about it, because before the flood or antediluvian times, if there was a constant light and there was all that extra food, I mean.
Exactly.
And then afterwards, you have to sort of grow it. Yeah. And then you have to have herd animals and stuff like that. Yeah. Go on.
Isis was the first to establish the laws. Hermes established religion. He was the first also to observe the orderly arrangement of the stars, which is astronomy, and create, which is interesting. So there was no astronomical, there was no way to look at the stars before, right? This makes you think. He started with astronomy to observe the stars and create stone calendars and erected obelisks to track time. That's what the obelisks are for. They're not phalluses. They might say yes. They're also that's what they're also. No. They were created to track time, and they used to use two of them to measure time and the seasons, and they use the heliacal rising of Sirius, like I was saying, and the harmony of the musical sounds. He also made a lyre with three strings, imitating the three seasons of the year: summer, winter, and spring. So they only had 3 seasons by the time Osiris was alive. And he introduced wrestling. Heracles, according to the Greek mythology, okay, I don't have to go out. He talks about Heracles and Athena and other gods, but then I was going to go to the beginning and say who ruled before him. Some say that Osiris is also represented as imitating the sky spangled with the stars. I don't know why they say that, but that was interesting.
Well, that's what they say about Hathor too. So.
As for Isis, the moon, when translated, it means very ancient. And because she was very ancient. And they put horns on her head, both because of her appearance, which she has to the eye when the moon is crescent-shaped, and because among the Egyptians, a cow is held sacred to her. Zeus, and since he was the source of the spirit of life in animals, they consider him to be, in a sense, the father of all things, man, and of the gods. And I think he's saying this because Zeus became to be the most important one. So then they have to go back and say Zeus is really the father of everyone. But that's what this means. It's not the father of the other gods, which he's going to go into.
Oh, yeah, yes. We've had that debate before. Right? That basically, it's almost the same as Jehovah and Yahweh. Yes, exactly. I mean,
Okay.
and of course, what are Jehovah's Witnesses now? I just realized. Oh, anyway, moving on.
Yeah,
there's
I know Jehovah Witnesses, and
there's an
I know
interesting
nothing.
correlation here. There's an interesting correlation in here, is that when the Earth reverses, it's often it's considered a new age, and there's a reversal that's not acknowledged. Though Ben talked about disturbance in the geological record of 17,000 years ago, but there's one that's at 18,500 years ago, which was the 16,497 BCE. Now, if you take 5,000 years and go from there, it comes, you get 11. If you take that, the 1,500 years, you get to 9,500 BC. That's the Atlantean era ending. So you can actually make a correlation from what the Egyptians talking about when the Atlantis sunk to this particular. It works out mathematically for that particular world era. Just a note.
Okay.
I didn't know that.
Great.
Wow,
interesting. So I'm going to continue. There's not much left, but it's interesting. Okay, so the fire they called Hephaestus, and they referred to it as sacred fire, heavenly fire. So that we talked about that before. Earth, the mother, they called Demeter, the giver of wealth. Oceanus, well, we're not talking about Oceanus, but he describes the other nature gods that they referred to as, the nature.
Right.
There was nature, and then they gave him a name. Now it goes to say, Egypt is the only country in the whole inhabited world where there are many cities which were founded by the first human gods, such as Zeus, Helios, Hermes, Apollo, Pan, Eileithia, and many more. And besides these, there are other gods, they say, who were terrestrial, living on earth, having been mortals, but because of their wisdom and the good services which they rendered to all men, attained immortality. So they became known as a planet or the star, some of them having even been kings in Egypt. Their names, when translated, are in some cases the same as those of the celestial gods, while others have a distinct appellation, such as Helios, Cronus, and Rhea, and also the Zeus, who is also called Ammon by some. And besides these, Hera and Hephaestus, and Hestia, and Hermes. And then he goes to say, Helios, according to some, was the first king of the Egyptians, his name being the same as that of the heavenly star. So, think about that. Helios, the first to be the king of Egypt, as referred to as a heavenly star. Some of the priests, however, say that Hephaestus was the first king. Then Cronus became the ruler, and upon marrying his sister Rhea, they loved to marry their sisters because he was higher on rank to become the king. So that's what they did that. He begat Osiris and Isis. He begat Osiris. He goes, here it is, Osiris and Isis, according to some writers of mythology. But according to the majority, Zeus and Hera, whose high achievements gave them dominion over the entire universe. From these last were sprung 5 gods, one born of each of the 5 days, which is the Egyptians' intercalate. I guess it's like a measuring, the week. The names of these were Osiris, Isis, who were sister and brother, also Typhoon. There was a king in Egypt called Typhoon, by the way, during the Moses events. Apollo, we know who Apollo is, the sun. He became the current sun. And Aphrodite. And Osiris, when translated, is Dionysius. Now, allegedly, Dionysius also went, well, I'm going to keep reading here. And Isis is more similar to Demeter.
Right.
And after Osiris married Isis and succeeded to the kingship, he did many things of service to the social life of men. And he says, my father is Cronus, the youngest of all the gods, and I am Osiris, the king, who campaigned over every country as far as the uninhabited regions of India and the lands to the north, even to the sources of the river Ishtar, and again to the remaining parts of the world as far as Oceanus, and I am the eldest son of Cronus. And then we talked about that he made people give up cannibalism. And then he goes to talk about the different cities that he and the other children or gods founded, and even goes to talk about Heracles going to Hyperborea. And, people love Hyperborea, so they should also read this and about the India, the second, I think that's book 2, because it talks about Hyperborea, and which is very interesting to many people. And then he goes to say after the flood, the first ruler was Menes, and he inscribed a curse in hieroglyphs to the temple of Zeus, because Zeus must have caused some problems, so he was mad at Zeus, and that's. I end up this part here, but then there's so much more, and it's really interesting.
The way that you pronounce Zeus, okay, the way you pronounce it sounds so close to Dios, it's scary.
Yes, because that's where it comes from. Zeus, Deus,
Yeah,
Dios Pater.
I would never have
our
made
Father.
that connection at all. Because,
well done.
because
Yes.
I've never heard it pronounced that way.
Well, you're right. That's where that comes from. That's where God and Dios comes from Zeus. Indeed.
Makes so much sense. But
you mentioned of Mies. You mentioned that's actually a dynastic king, and we have a date for that one.
Yes.
I'm wondering if these gods,
maybe they were human. Yeah, maybe they were. It sounds like they were human rulers that had so much knowledge, and they were regarded as gods. And then
besides this obviously being the origin of the show Stargate by Roland Emmerich, this, because obviously, just obviously, someone had to have read this and go, "I have a great idea for a TV show." But but what I'm seeing here though is that a lot of this might, and I'm not trying to be rude, but when you're talking about these people here, they're going to be around 2,000 years ago according to conventional calendar, and they're talking about a time way before that. This guy obviously has an idea of what politics is. Okay, I mean, we're talking about a time when, if I'm not mistaken, isn't some sort of Cleopatra shit going down, like around here?
60 BC. Well, there was a lot. Julius Caesar was 44 BC. That's not too far off. But
okay, and then there was Mark Antony. Okay. So yeah. Well, anyway,
Augustus is after.
What I'm saying is that if he goes down there and he's talking to these people, he's probably going. I mean, I would say, oh, and by the way, the gods, the gods actually founded our cities. So I don't know if I would go and blaspheme those gods, because each city is protected by an actual god who actually walked the city streets. So I know you guys are Romans, but I'm saying a curse is a curse. I wouldn't mess with that. So I'm saying.
Yes, no, I agree. And all of these historians were, they were the bloodlines, and they were part royalty, because that's why they had access to all these.
Yeah, well, they'd have to be, right? And they had to be trusted too. Yes, exactly. Yes, it's like when the Romans talk about how horrifyingly bad and evil and monstrous the Celts were, or whatever, up here, or the Picts, whatever they're called. When they came down and they were all horrible and shit, and they ate their own babies and crap. And they just said the same thing about the Carthaginians, which, and of course, we tried to back it up by saying things like, they go, for example, they say, he goes, look what it says on this baby's grave. It says, we offered this baby to Baal, or whatever. It's like,
yes,
well, you're a friggin' idiot is what you are if you think that means a sacrificed kid, because that's exactly what we write on our friggin' tombstones when a child dies. We offer this child up to God.
Yeah, and there was also a lot of death when these catastrophes were happening.
Well, obviously, yes, and they're going to die young. I mean, a lot of babies died young, and they're going to bury them in the same spot, away from everyone else, because you don't want to be reminded of your unnamed baby or your very young child that just passed away, or whatever. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of that going to happen with stillbirths and so forth. So they might not go to a cemetery with everyone else. They might be buried together, and that would
Yes.
look like a sacrifice. Like, oh yeah, this is where they sacrificed the children. They must have killed them over here and threw them on over there, just right there in that pit. It's like, no, they were probably really sad when this happened. Like anyone would be. But
Yes.
that's the propaganda of Roman still filtering in through 2,000 years of history.
Yes, and and the same thing happened with the goddess Tanit. I was doing that little video, and I also mentioned that the child sacrifices because they said Moloch. Hamon, who she supplanted Hamon in around 600. No, what was it? 400, 600 A.D. Something like that. I can't remember now exactly. Or was it BC? No, I'm confused. Yeah, see, that's what happens. Was it BC or AD?
Well, Moloch
must have been BC.
would have been.
Hang on. Well, anyways, that must have been BC. Yes, it was BC, of course. Yes, it was BC. Now I remember. Yeah, so they're saying Moloch. That was Moloch, and that was Carthage, and they had the whole thing about Moloch and the child sacrifices, and they're talking about that. But they're just saying, oh, these people are really bad. But you know what? Since all this history that I've been reading, it's just really shocking, and it's really terrible, and it's really depressing. And sometimes I cry at night. Seriously, I go to bed and I just cry because it's so sad. It's just not happy. It's tough. You have to have a tough skin and read. And there was a lot of cannibalism going on every time there were famines and catastrophes, which were a lot, and they were ongoing, just happening a lot, like we said. And I don't want to be a party pooper, but it's just when you read
how
history,
could you be a party
find
pooper? The
these-
Donner Party ate each other. I mean, there's a whole movie called Alive about eating people. And I'm not.
Yes, and
I'm not
sometimes it was
saying.
even their parents eating their children. And remember, we were talking about why did we forget all these? And then I
That's
was
a good
thinking,
reason.
Imagine telling your grandchild, your grandfather had to eat the rest of his children, but not me. I survived. That's something that you probably don't want to talk about, ever.
Let me throw in
ever.
something
Like,
here.
You're absolutely right, and you scare the crap out of me just thinking about it. But someone threw in
it
something
happened
else.
in the 1800s
Yeah.
and the 1600s.
I just want to talk about how if you really reconsider the context of devastation and the death of children and the death of everybody, basically, is that the universe has a great way of getting us here.
Chris, the philosopher.
No, I'm taking a little page off of
that's
Eugene,
good.
but ultimately, reapproaching the idea of death and cannibalism from a less
my goodness.
emotional standpoint as
I know.
more of a natural process. Would you like a tree that never aged? Could you eat a fruit that never ripened? This idea, if you just, we have this ego mind, the bicameral mind that allows us to separate ourselves from our surroundings, which is the same as, a magnetic particle being locked in space, but also having separation from the other particles or entities.
We also have to admit that they might not even have remembered because they were literally on another brain, like when you're in shock or whatever, your other brain is taking over.
Traumatized.
I think it's just quickly, the thought here is that we're online with a bunch of people. Again, I always bring this up, but disseminating stories about cannibalism and from the context of, and this is not to judge Tess, honestly, it's just like something that I've worked out in my life, which is this devastation is pretty necessary for us to be here. It's terrible,
the way it is, right, Chris? Is the way it is. What can we do about it?
No, but it's great. It's not bad.
It's great.
That's because by virtue of it. Well, the philosophical aspect is the fact that we're here. It's the fact that if we weren't here,
we survived.
then you could say that cannibalism and these things were terrible. I know a lot of people would disagree with this, but
very dark. It's a dark reality, Grace.
Well, this is the yin-yang concept. Yeah. It's not really like it's the wobble, right? The black and white are not even. They push into each other. One pushes, one pulls, and the ebb and flow is what creates our whole. So holism really encompasses devastation, in which case maybe we can look at this concept. Everybody should be happy. Everybody should be successful. Everybody should be a leader.
I agree.
Not really.
No, that's
not actually really.
Yeah,
though. The universe doesn't allow that.
That's
Well,
crazy
but that's
and
what I mean.
unrealistic, right?
So yeah, so my point really is like maybe it's time to actually reapproach the concept of death and destruction and devastation from the context of necessity versus emotional knee-jerk reaction of and that's not to say people don't have their own feelings and say cannibalism is terrible. I'm not pro cannibalism here,
okay,
but
well, I'm just telling you
Don't
right.
eat me.
No.
But we're here.
I'm telling you right now, guys. I'm just telling you right now that I never much cared for it myself.
I'd rather die.
James
I'd rather
here
die than have to eat anything. But of course, I have never been that hungry. So, but I hope that I'm never in that situation because
well,
yes.
obviously you don't want to be in that situation.
Historically, I mean, even at the 1800, the number one cause of death of women was childbearing, and so the grief cycle for husbands was just substantial, and I mean the child death rate was unbelievable. I mean, they have 21 kids, and 3 of them would survive into their adulthood. So it was just horrendous. And then you add on all the more ancient ones. I mean, heck, in South America, there are still tribes that are sacrificing children. And that's just like what?
Not surprised.
Yeah,
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So
well,
one final just note on that. Self-regulation, right? The universe is a self-regulating system. It manifests, we've talked about this before, but we separate cultural events and words and phenomena from so-called natural events. But honestly, cannibalism, murder, all these things.
Let's not dwell on that particular part. Let me take your core though, and say that we can actually pluck this into something that's actually been expressed before by J. Michael Straczynski in the show Babylon 5. The overall arcing show types, of course, is between order and chaos. And one of the overall spacefaring races was believing that, ideologically speaking, we should cause chaos and destruction, for it will cause the best things to live. And, of course, the other one is order and progress. So the debate, of course, being, what do we do? The trouble is, we've been formed by both. Because there are times when we've lost everything and had to rebuild, and in so doing have learned a lot more. And of course, we don't want to talk about what warfare has done, but because obviously,
don't try to eat me, Neil. It's going to not end well.
But I'm just saying, philosophically speaking, that's the core of what we're debating is, but they talk about that in the ancient past that we learned from the gods when they were doing symbols in the sky. We wrote them down. We tried to understand. We didn't. We made language from these symbols as we were repeating the sounds and pointing. I can picture all of this happening. Monkey see, monkey do-ish, if you would.
I just mean the inflection and the way we speak nowadays is really part of it, right? It's about changing the language. It's about being more specific. And when we talk about devastation, or when I hear people talk about devastation, I've started to change my language, is that it was necessary. It is necessary. It's fine. And the only reason that's important is because once you get past bad and good, then you can do things. But if you're stuck on the fact that things are terrible and bad and evil or good or too bad, then you're stuck on trying to solve the existence of one or the other.
Well, that's just you're down to a philosophical debate, not a practical one. You're right.
I like that. That's a good point.
No, suffering won't end.
Yeah, and also I think that the fear of dying, that's something that I'm not afraid, but there's so many people that are so afraid that they're just, I don't know, they're just like, oh no, I don't want to talk. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Don't tell me. Don't tell me.
It's from specifically this, though, I think. Like if smart, there are leaders, right? So you have thought leaders. People listen to thought leaders. If thought leaders change the inflection and intonation of like what we just talked about, like cannibalism, yes, is horrible. However, the universe is a self-correcting system. If you all throughout the Thunderbolts Project videos, there's this idea of self-correction, self-regulation. We are it. Thoughts are it. So there's a fully recursive way that the universe corrects itself and allows us to exist, right? So by virtue of existing, it's already positive. There is only the positive. There is, in a way, there is no negative because we actually exist. There is no opposite to that. We don't not exist. So in a way, yeah,
you're pro-cannibalism.
I'm the first pro-cannibalism candidate.
Well, actually, to be perfectly honestly,
I see where this is going. It's to cannibalism. That's what's up.
There's a reason. There's a reason why these things have to actually happen.
Wait. Sorry, Disney is cannibalizing media companies, right?
Oh my God.
And
don't even talk about Star Wars.
Yeah.
Don't even talk about Star Wars. Don't talk about Star Wars. Don't talk about Star Wars. Don't talk about. Go to your happy place. Go to your happy place. Go to your happy place.
This comes down to the world, to one's worldview, and which is materialism. Maybe it's a defensive mechanism, so you don't want to feel anything, because if everything is dead, then you can't kill anything. You're not responsible for having anything die or anything, because it's already dead. And so you can justify or make your defense system. The problem is that those values that are in the worldview are going to be in your physics models. And if they're not valid, they're going to resist to hold on to them because they don't want to be responsible for life.
You just basically talked about why we don't explore consciousness, for example. As opposed to...
We're in the Walking Dead realm here. Can we go back to the heliosphere, please?
I know, eh?
But, okay, back to happy times. No,
so,
but,
what is the sun currently thinking?
One last thing, was there really a golden age? I haven't found one.
Thinking that its fields have caused us to say all these insane things.
Well, hold on.
The sun is like, this is all my fault. The sun feels guilty for what we've just said.
All right.
Well, hold on. Neil here. Like, guys, my thoughts is if this is actually something that we can, like when we talk about like the golden age type of idea, when they're talking about something, they talk about things that they were backing, like the future was something they backed into, that they were looking back to a past that was gone, something that they really longed for. That longing for, when things were peaceful or whatever it was, that was something that they very much enjoyed, because now they have to work for it, as opposed to just picking it off of fruit trees or whatever. But is there a situation where the lifespans of people were longer in the past, and the trauma of actual aging and dying and not just getting eaten by something was real? And we we started making like monuments to that event, like death,
But how could that even be the case, though?
Well, it was easier. It wasn't perfect because they were dinosaurs. They were dinosaurs or big animals with teeth. And we just heard that cannibalism was going on since we left the plasma sheath. The plasma sheath was removed once we entered the heliosphere, according to Walt Thornhill. The plasma sheath is removed from the dwarf stars because they become cathodes.
They shrink down. Yeah.
They become cathodes, not anodes anymore. That's how they react to the heliosphere.
Actually, that's a pretty good way of saying it. Yeah. But go on.
I think that's what he said. I just watched his video.
Well, that's one of the reasons I mentioned when I said cathodic stars. That's when we say cometary cathodic, because that's exactly the issue. We would see it as the glow around it, because and we do see that when we look at some stars. We see that they are cathodic. They're not anodic like ours.
Yeah, once we enter the solar system, if that happened to all the round dwarf, all the gas giants that are currently in the solar system, then all that was lost. All the goodness was gone like that. And all the kings that I have read, if you read Diodorus, they are all speaking of civilization, agriculture, astronomy, enslavement, wars, everything that is civilization, and work that's not a golden age to me. So perhaps the golden age existed before these rulers started gathering up people into their civilizations, or whenever that happened. It was just before that and before we enter the heliosphere, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. And the catastrophes also seem to have happened since they could see the moon. And of course, the flaring, and either Uranus or Neptune and Saturn, and then Jupiter and all that, Mars, Venus, and all of that, and Mercury and Neptune. If there was anything, it must have been just before we entered the heliosphere, and before we started a civilization, because then nothing was the same, and people had to work for a living, and they had to go to school, and they had to basically, just be a slave for a long time until recent times. I mean, it's been really, really tough for people. It's been horrible for people, actually. We're so spoiled and lucky that we have no idea.
That's what I mean, Tess. Actually, can I take umbrage and just have fun with this? Because, I don't understand that. How is it bad? Even though I know it's bad. I know the world is really a difficult place for a lot of people.
As defined by suffering, probably.
Yeah, the idea of suffering is...
Are you a masochist, Chris?
No, I love pleasure. I love pleasure, but I do understand now that we must die in order for life to continue. This idea of constantly evading death is
I agree.
The reason. Basically, I have old people in my family who are aging and who are near death, who have never made peace with dying, and therefore their life is entirely occupied with avoiding death.
Yeah, that's not right.
I thought you were saying you wanted to be cannibalized.
Hey, whatever.
Oh my God, stop
I'm just saying, we could make fun of it, but I'm telling you, the language is what changes minds. People are not on shows like this. We are on shows like this. So we are thought leaders at this point. You have 70 people listening, right? They can hear they think what they want of me, but ultimately, if you really want to get this thing moving, we have to consider our approach to things. It's the same way people who dabble in music versus become deep musicians. I know I always go back to music, but it's about levels, right? You get to one layer, and you could stop there. And so I think the approach of negativity in the world, if we approached it more positively, then we could really reconcile the why. Therefore, you can move forward and have the do.
I agree.
See, I completely agree. I think that's absolutely true. Furthermore, I think what's also really interesting is the idea that if we see anomalous human behavior in the past, we can infer that something weird was going on in their world that brought them to be able to do or be willing to do or feel they had to do this thing. I mean, that's sort of a really powerful suggestion for why human beings do things, because they're desperate, because they have to, because their environment has created circumstances whereby that makes sense in that context. And when you say we live in a very kind of a cloistered or protected sort of Eden-like time. And I think you're right by comparison. And, I think that, a lot can be sort of explained by these ancient rituals of human sacrifice, of, cutting off the balls of the god and feeding them to the other god. And I mean, there's a lot of weird shit. But I think that those things indicate some extreme experiences that were occurring in the environment of the people who lived in that time. So it's highly contextual, but I think it's very revealing at the same time.
We were talking about the heliosphere being a barrier and what that means. Is it conscious? Is that part of our consciousness? Is it part of the sun's consciousness, or is it part of the solar system conscious? How did
Good question.
When
it's a real trendy.
Saturn was coming in when Saturn was coming into it, it had its own heliosphere, and most of the times, as Ted would suggest, Ted Holden, is that it would just bumped off of each other because the sun has its heliosphere and the Saturn has its heliosphere. So what happened that allowed it to get so close? And
it would have to lose charge to the point where it could pierce it.
Well, no, the whole universe would be going through a CCF, a change in cosmic function, which temporarily made them weak, so that it could get in there. But then that would be a very rare event because it would have to be perfectly timed. And then when it come back up, then Saturn's caught inside of it. It can't leave.
Well, yeah, that's almost like an idea of fusion in a way. Like you actually have to get the neutron right to the nucleus and make it stay there. Like it because it doesn't want to. It would normally want to bounce off. If it was not hitting relatively perfectly, it would fly off to the left or right as it has so much charge. It would have to respond to these fields. Anyway, you were saying, sorry.
No, I was gonna say something a little. Oh, go ahead, James. Sorry. Let's continue.
No, I mean, you could go through a whole scenario where you could actually put dates to this, because the CCF would happen with 80-fold reductions. It would happen in 66,000 years ago. But we know that 60,000 years ago, the civilization that was at the North Pole just went extinct. And we have, I believe we have mythologies that says that, the Earth flipped. It faced this. It was facing Saturn, and now it's facing the Sun, and then because of the change of the changes, the Sun's rays are not the same as Saturn rays. That civilization went extinct on the North Pole, but we've got physical evidence of that, and that happened 60,000 years ago.
See, I don't know when that happened, but I do know that it's more than likely there was a society up there, which didn't surprise me when I saw this little thing on some obscure post about ancient finds of earthworks in like Siberia or something, and I was like, well, yeah, I mean, that's like, we found some weird jade city-like structure in parts of northern Ontario. Like, why is this here? And there's trees that are growing up through it. So, but why is this here? Like, why? What the heck is going on? Why are these people so like getting close to this area as best as they can? Anyway.
You mean a city of jade in Ontario? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
The hell?
Yeah. There's there's other things like that. Like there's a lot of jade that comes from Canada, so it doesn't really surprise me.
Well,
yeah,
anyway,
but that's my only response. Is I didn't know there was a city of jade in Ontario. That's
the word
weird.
City might be, because I don't know, it was never excavated. But
upbuilding is still a lot.
Yeah, it's definitely at least as much as that. So, and there's stuff like that where you're like, people have gone spelunking in some of these structures in Siberia, and you're like, and the stories that came back were like, otherworldly almost. So.
I'd like
Siberia's
to make one more.
a weird place, man.
Can I make one more observation here, and then I'll shut STF? Just triggered by what Tess said, and not triggered in a negative way, but Tess was talking about, do I like torture or whatever, am I a masochist? But
I was joking, Chris.
No, just made me think of something.
Yeah, I was kidding. I don't really think you're a cannibal.
No, I listened to Alan Watts, and he makes a great, he has this great anecdote. He talks about how there's a certain point where when you're eating, basically it goes from pleasure to disgust. And that they have these scenarios where people are tortured, where basically pain ultimately turns into pleasure. So really, you can push in either direction, you're going to come back around. And does pain and pleasure correlate to charge densities and plasma layers, basically, in terms of like radiated fall off of perception, where you feel pain up to a point, and then as you break through this plasma sheath, and all of a sudden it's actually pleasurable.
Honestly, I have
extremities
no
of feelings.
Well, I have a comment to make. You know how many people
this
are
supposed to be
pushing
about Voyager,
antidepressants, right? Well,
yes.
yeah, we're talking about being happy or sad or pain or good and evil. Antidepressants, for example.
It depends on if wearing leather or not.
You're not allowed to be sad, right? Like Chris was saying, you're not allowed to be negative. You're not allowed to be sad. You can't
Or you're
just
whipped.
cry and be, just Oh, well, I think that's completely wrong. People should be able to be depressed because that's their mind and their body telling them that they need to change something in their life or do something about differently than what they're doing. If you just pop a pill or drink, get drunk, or do drugs to just
I call that the classroom. That's what I call that.
Or wear studded leather armor.
Yeah, when things are I sit down and cry, and I'm just like, okay, let's feel this. You let it go through you, right? You let it pass.
Yes.
The worst thing you can do is push your emotions away or hold on to them.
I concur.
You can't hold on to them either, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you got to let it pass through you, and you got to let, like the tree, let the wind blow through you, and let it pass by, and then you can be like, okay,
like a reed
what
in
was
the wind.
that? What did that mean? Then you can look at it and analyze it and think
Yes.
about it. But that's taking your feelings into consideration, and that's being tuned in. That's really what that is that willingness to sort of, what is my heart telling me right now, and understand your heart well enough to know what that language is. That's what it comes down to.
Somebody said,
go ahead.
Yeah. No, somebody said this in the comments about resonance or whatever, and it reminded me, so basically pain and pleasure are resonant frequencies. And there's overload and underload, and that's really what it is. It's a modality. So the reason you can get pleasure ultimately out of pain is because you start recognizing the pattern of pain, and your mind gets used to it, and it dissolves into something you don't really notice anymore, and therefore a new feeling can emerge. And it's the same way, like where you get overloaded on something sugary, and it's really pleasurable, and it's kicking your whole system into gear, and then all of a sudden you get really nauseous, and it's like, man, I don't want to eat any more of that. That's a very interesting boundary layer that gets broken we do it 100 times a day in different ways with conversations, people, eating, interactions, and these are very interesting to me as psychological plasma layers that could recursively help understand space. All right, now that's got a little too weird, but
well, you got me thinking too, like, what if are these, help me you guys, the two spirals, the two corkscrews that we see are symbolized by, those are Birkeland currents?
Yes.
Okay. What if I'm a giant being and I can stand back and look at those two spirals intertwining in the sky, and I can begin to read them like grooves on a record? What if I can look at individual fluctuations within those currents and how they relate to each other, and that is then how I can see or understand the Akashic record? These vibrations are continuing off of each other constantly. So there's a communication, there's a language implied. All of this from a perspective could be just vibrations that could be recorded and played back and looked at from multiple different ways. The difference between the space between the spirals could be almost like a Morse code. I mean, it's not hard to think in terms of like groove on a record. And I don't know, it just seems like the more we think about it, the more we realize.
You're not wrong at all. Like, I mean, we can hear like when we look at the radio frequencies of another planet, we can hear it and what it sounds like. Different planets sound very different. We can do that with stars. And that's just the fluctuations of a magnetic layer. But since we are on the Earth, everything that we do affects this layer that we're in, even minutely. So in a way, the electrons that are carried away would technically have sort of a record of that as they go down the pipe. But I can't imagine that they're not, I mean, well, a lot of these are getting fed right back into the system, like they're not really going anywhere. But anyway, just a thought. I like your idea though.
Yeah, I'm thinking big picture here because I don't necessarily have all the details, but it seems to me that there's a lot of information that's produced simply by all of the wave energy that exists and communicates and bounces off of each other. This is what's spooky action of a distance is really just a switch of energy. It's that immediate transfer from a negative to a positive in two different ways that communicate immediately with each other. I mean, it seems like these things start to really make sense when we understand how everything is connected. much like neurons in the brain.
But here is something that this conversation actually did bring to me in a different way. While I was thinking about someone getting flogged for whatever reason, I'm not sure what the conversation was about, but I'm sure there was whipping involved. There was I was thinking about the twisted nature of how a whip is made when you fold leather over itself, and that's just an extension of the grip of a sword extended outwards. But of course, we would see that long, thin representation of Venus. I mean, and then they put a star on the end of it and they start whipping things with it. So technically a whip is a holy weapon. And then I realized, oh, well, when it got multiple tails, the cat of nine tails, why did it have 9 tails? You know, like...
Isn't the cracking of a whip actually a breaking of the sound barrier?
Oh, yes, it is.
Isn't that...
Neil, I love this line of thought. Go.
Oh, well, I often think that many of the things that we consider to be weapons are actually derivatives of holy relics, and that's why they were used to hit people with, because eventually the priest would get so pissed off at somebody and he'd smack him with this large axe, which this axe, of course, is just a symbol for Saturn. No big deal. They put it on a tree or whatever, and then now they're bashing people in the head with it. And the same with swords, and the same with all of that. Whips.
Why 9?
Well, 9 because that's how many how many heads did the Medusa get when she went all nuclear there? Like,
but 9 lives of a cat too. Like, I was thinking exactly the same thing.
Oh, well, there could be layers like that. Like, see what
cat
I mean?
Of
like
9 tail. What's the cat and what are the 9 references? I mean,
no, you're very right. I don't know, but I'm sure that there's probably. I mean, like the Morning Star, duh. You know, like stuff like that. You know, like you begin to understand like why a katana is shaped like a katana. Why is there a thunderbolt in the grip of it, woven into the twisted leather of the hilt? And that thunderbolt is there because that's what it is supposed to represent. I mean, your power is coming from the god to your Bushido dude, to his lord, to you, to stab this motherfucker. You know, like this is what you're doing. This is the will of the Lord, you know, type of crap. You know, like there's...
All right, more FPSs and less RPGs,
yeah,
please.
Sorry
Neil.
about
more
that.
FPSs, less RPGs. That's
Neil,
the rule.
I was always wondering why the way that they held the sword was kind of like some people hold a putting, a golf putter. It's like the weirdest stance in your hand to hold the sword than you could possibly imagine, unless you're going to thrust and whatever. It's weird.
Well, we got to understand that. I mean, these people also do sumo wrestling, which is literally making a horizon, which is a big circle. You start on each point, use thunderclaps by slapping, and you try to push the other big fat round god out of the sky. Then you are the king god. That's literally sumo wrestling. Am I wrong?
Mind blown.
Is that really the mythology? I never knew that.
Well, but I'm honestly not sure. But when I see that, that's what I'm seeing instantly. There's no debate in my head what that's about. There are Jupiter and Saturn fighting for kingship of the gods, and they're slapping each other with thunderbolts to take it out. And that's what they were doing, and we saw it in the sky. I mean, I can't debate that.
I think Zeus would be the guy who would wear leather, and Poseidon would probably wear shark skin or something, right?
Well, remember, they're not...
Probably both have studs.
It's actually their comas, not actually the planets, not them. Like, because you got to understand, they're big, fat, bulbous comas. Like, the reason that they look so fat is probably the same reason that got fat is the same reason we made Venus figurines fat. If you get my meaning.
That's exactly why I got fat. I would like to...
You were trying to imitate a Venus figurine?
It's a planet.
I fluctuate between fat.
I'm developing my gravitational field is what I'm doing. So...
What's interesting to me about this sumo is obvious. It's quite obvious. The whole thing is now that we know the start, I mean, we know the end, how everything is as it is.
Right. Thank God.
Now,
start here, work backwards. Got it.
But we can reconstruct what the sun looked like, and we can someday we'll get enough brown dwarfs to figure out what all that kind of the possibilities of what a Saturn system would be. If we could figure out the component parts of both, then we could figure out the middle part. And that's what I'm hoping Tessa can give us a big insight on, because I've got no clue about what the mythological things. But I've got a model now, and I think we can start working on the middle part. So that's yeah.
It's incredibly exciting.
It is. And well, there's obviously a debate here. I mean, I'm pretty sure that Donald Scott's idea that we are his idea that the sun is part of a current is, well, I mean, given what we've seen now, might not be the case. We're seeing a lot of ideas that the sun is attached to the rim of one of these things, much like I think I said it before, much like a transport truck is swinging around a tornado. It's sort of attached to the side. That's now its point of gravity, if you know what I mean. And it seems that gravity is affected in a tornado, which, just pointing that out.
Neil, can I say something?
Of course.
Really quickly? Thank you.
More than welcome to.
Okay, great. Well, I just wanted to, I was just taking a quick look at the chat and when you guys were talking. And I noticed Kronos was not happy with what I have said or whatever, I don't know, my theory it's not my theory. I'm just the messenger. And I do have a theory, but it's just a theory. Like I've said before, I don't know everything for sure. I wasn't there. I only can deduct what I know, and I have my little theory.
We discussed there's propaganda. We don't know what really.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
but
there's so much in there.
I'm talking about everything. Yeah, I'm talking about everything. Yes, you're right. Anytime you go and read a book or look at a symbol or a history book, it's full of propaganda. So then, what do? Do we just burn everything?
No, we have to be diligent and discerning. Yes.
Exactly. So you look at things and you use your brain and you think.
Well, where do you think that sumo wrestling thing came from?
Right?
And the sword thing. I mean, I'm just thinking about how these things are used.
That's
right?
good. Yes, that's good. No, but I was thinking about Kronos and
Bravo,
he's been.
Tess. 100% agree.
100%. Yeah.
Thank you. And he's been always like telling me, well, so you don't agree with David Talbot, or so you don't believe in this, you don't believe in that. It's like, you know what? I'm not here to fight with anyone. I am grateful to all the men that have come before us that opened the doors to talk about the electric universe and say, hey, look, this is not right. What we've been told, let's look at history, let's look at things and analyze and go from the viewpoint and the scientists and the mythologies. And if he's not perfect, I'm not perfect, that's not the point. The point is that we're here all. I am the younger generation, and I feel responsible to come and give what I can find and put it out there. And whatever fits and it's of use, good use for everyone, we'll take it. I want humans to not hate each other and not be fighting. And I think what I found in history, it's very helpful to understand from my point of view, to bring it out to the light and just put it out there, and maybe people can think,
yes.
why are we fighting? Why are we hating each other? The Yahweh, the Saturn, do you worship this? No, it's not about that. And I'm trying to just put it out there. That's why I said I don't take sides, because I'm on the side of all of us, of humanity.
I'm on the side of Joe Pesci, because he's scary, and that's whose side I'm on. But what I'm saying, but you're
Neil, don't do. Come on, that was really important, Tess.
I wasn't. What I'm trying to.
That did sort of trivialize it, though. If you don't mind me saying,
you're absolutely right. But
has a sense of humor. That's okay.
No, so do I. But you said something very valid, and that's a huge part of this.
But let me. That was my sort of break the ice, and then I'm going to actually explain why I agree with you.
I didn't mean to sound serious.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry.
I'll take responsibility for sounding
totally
serious.
Cool.
I don't. All due respect, Neil.
However, let's just.
I think she meant don't throw people out of society just because they're cannibals. I think is what she said. Is what she was trying to say there.
Obviously,
I tried to unpack it for you there, not to put words in your mouth, but
you are right in regards to. I try to memorize all of the different theories, including the conventional theories, with regards to what this is, because that's the only way you're going to really know when you're starting to see mistakes, and being open enough to accept these things. As James can tell us, when he was at these conferences way back in '94,
2000
or 2000, sorry, that there has been disagreements that have caused rifts, and I don't want to. I mean, John Cook, for example, who I thought SaturnianCosmology.org is a fantastic source for a lot of things. At least it gives you a groundwork, and it's available on the web. So I encourage people, and he wrote it. It's 1,500 pages. It's a great book. However, it doesn't always mesh up with everything that David Talbot says or DeWater said or anything like that. So we can't, or Renz or so many others. So we're never going to 100% agree. And often when I go back and listen to certain things, I find myself saying I disagreed at the time, but now I agree with this person. And it's okay to change. I've done it probably within the length of this show. Like, since this show has been 101 episodes, I guarantee you my opinions have changed on Jim's work, on certain cymatics, on aspects of astrology, and that's okay. And some things haven't. Some things I'm like, okay, that's still, it can't go that way because that would violate EE. And then someone might go, well, not if you do this. And I'm like, oh, maybe. And so there's certain things that you have your own background gives your tendency to try to use. But if we're being discerning and trying to be diligent and fair to those people who have put forth very valid hypotheses, enough so that they can be tested, or at least can bring up evidence from the past in word or whatever, that might be, oh, maybe you're misinterpreting that. Maybe it means this and not that, or other things like. So we shouldn't really be so hard, because it's discovery. It's about discovery.
Yeah, the idea that we all have to agree is like, well, I did when I went in 2000. I had all the basic chronology that I had, but I there wasn't anybody to listen to me or to see it. They thought chronology was just too tough of a subject, or they just didn't know enough to
I still
to validate
don't.
it. And then I had my own ideas. I had a 20-fold reduction in the geological record, not the 80 that I've got now, which changed things a huge amount. And I was all against Tablet's Saturn theory coming in, and I thought I had it all figured out. But it took a while, and then I finally figured out that Dave's ideas were what that they were valid. And then it took a while to make it so that it would work. So anybody who's against Wall or against the big guys that are at the present time, it's okay. I mean, they let me in. They let me say my piece, not completely, but I eventually got in, and thanks to Neil, I actually got to explain myself. So this is just the process.
Can I pose a question real quick, even though I'm probably on shit list right here? But I feel like what is the goal of any of this, right? I think without a goal, and I understand this idea, we don't have to all agree, right? But maybe it's not about agreement or disagreement. Maybe it's about leadership and defining a point that that one wants to reach and getting there.
Actually, I'll call you a historian on this, if I may.
Okay.
Well, not a historian, sorry, Sir Fred Hoyle. He actually was in the Universe Cosmology Quest video, and he discussed in that video a particular incident issue where he said the problem is the graduate school, he would say, that it's ruled by consensus, that you have to agree, and it's taught top down, whereas back in my day you were supposed to thumb your nose professor and prove him wrong. That's the way you got ahead. And that was the birth of consensus science that happened in the 30s and 40s. that really changed everything, because that's what Schrodinger stood up and said. You can't just sit there and call this guy's model the right one because you all think Niels Bohr is the balls. You can't do that. Like, that's no, everyone can't. You can't just start printing textbooks here like this just because. No, I disagree vehemently. Well, too bad. We all voted. You're wrong. Like, no, you can't do that. You know, like, that's not how science works. And that's the issue,
But
because we have the
ultimately
it's the authority. It's the authority.
But that's the thing. If we've had this discussion before, but systems do work that way.
Of course.
We don't want them to. But the actual popular science right now is incorrect science, but it's popular. So popularity can't be removed from the equation. So I'm saying, like, I have a particular goal with what I do.
Well, actually,
and I'm on a show. I'm talking. Yeah.
I only meant to say that, although I agree with you what you're saying, his argument was that it was being formalized as opposed to evidence being the thing that proves the point. If you get my meaning, like, when you prove them wrong, you prove them wrong. Like, I proved your theory false, bitch. Like, I mean, that's what you were supposed to do.
But that's what I'm saying. I was trying to say it's sort of like the evolved version of that thinking is actually is goal-oriented thinking. It's not about snap judgment thinking. You can make snap judgments on your way to a goal. But to consider every snap judgment the goal is short-sighted, in my opinion.
Well, clearly, I think it was just a matter of they argue with principle, but that's all I was trying to.
The great thinkers had great thoughts. I just feel like as we evolve along this Birkeland current, right? This is the whole point, is that we change, we learn the rules and we learn how to evolve the rules, right? So using old rules to describe where we want to go might not be the way forward.
Oh, it was just a history lesson.
No, not judging what you just said. I just mean my whole point about, like, what are goals, right? Like, what if somebody told you, what would you like to see happen in 5 years with Electric Universe? How I pose that to all of you in the chat room too, because I have a vision of what that looks like. Specific.
I think I know what would start happening first. But
Neil, can I add something?
Of course.
I actually am. This is sort of what my sort of thesis, that the idea of how these ideas interface with people and how we communicate them and how we, how that all happens, is something that I think is really important to ask ourselves and to think about. I think with respect to Kronos, I think what we see is passion. And I think what we have to do is support passion. But we have to understand that passion comes from a place of seeking that what I try to talk about as the space between the dark and the light.
I suppose we didn't want to actually make you the poster boy, Kronos, of like some sort of evil idea. So we're apologizing right up front.
Not at all.
No. I mean,
if we stand in one and look to the other, it would be, there's this idea that we should have more. The point is that you have to see both. You have to be willing to hold the current ideas in your head, but also be completely willing to sacrifice those ideas on the cross of what is actually now more true. And so it's really difficult for us, all of us, when we finally find the truth and we realize how hard it's going to be to fight to get the truth out, and then someone comes in with a different truth that feels contradictory, it's extremely threatening for all of us. We all have to acknowledge that reality and understand that we have to hold both our current views as one leg of our table, but another leg of our table, that leg that supports us, has to be the introduction of new ideas, because those are the additional pieces of the puzzle that will ultimately give us a clear picture. So we have to be fluent and fluid in both our acceptance of new and also our reliance on the past. It's a very difficult balance, and we're not, none of us doing it well.
I'm so desperate to answer this.
But together,
me too,
Chris, together.
Even my mom is desperate to answer this.
And we don't eventually, we all walk away with something more. And that's my thing. It's in that iron sharpening iron. It's that crossing of swords that really does produce those new elements, and those are the gold. So passion should never be suppressed, but we also are learning structure and how to cope with holding on to old ideas that are now new, that used to be old, and then letting go of the new and integrating it with the old. This is a synthesis.
Oh my
And
God!
it's a- it's a-
How much I have
it's a-
evolved in thinking about just the sun, what powers the sun, since
It's
since
the
high
fluid.
school,
It's a fluid
then
process.
since the
It's a daily
Electric Universe, since the Electric Universe alone, it has expanded like so many different ways, just because of what we've learned. I mean, this
And
alone.
what we're asking people to like accept this new paradigm, but be willing to abandon it in a minute for a new paradigm if it comes along. It's very unstable feeling. It's a very
But that's science.
state of flux. When we're in a state of change, it's very pliant and it doesn't feel stable. It's frightening to us.
I get it. That was
It's
a pun.
scary.
Wasn't
It's like
it?
we're
State of
standing in the
flux?
sand.
Look,
It's like we're asking
nobody
people
can
to
do
stand in the
this.
sand.
Nobody can do this. I mean, the average guy, they cannot hold on to more than one worldview. And to give up that is kind of like losing their own identity of who they are, and they don't feel safe in that. And we're the weird, we're really, really weird if you can do that, okay? You're the oddest oddball that there is. That's what we are.
I'm holding
You're
I'm
absolutely
holding
right.
about 7 in my head right now.
Yeah, well, but the thing of it is that there's
Seven
Dave,
different ways.
yes.
Yeah.
there's
Can I
unconscious.
say? Well, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate all of you. You're awesome. And just like you said, we don't have to agree. No one has to agree. We just have to be open and listen to one another and just
learn.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
we're
cool.
learning.
Yeah, it's cool that we're all open. I mean, to this other possibility. Like Jamie's saying, we're not the norm. We have broken already that barrier of what I've been told since I was born is what it is. And no, we've broken that, and we're coming and looking at everything from a new point of view. And if my theory doesn't fit somebody else's theory, it's okay. I'm not here to dismiss. I appreciate David Talbot and the Thunderbolt Project so much. I watched all their videos since 2012 or 2013, all of them. And that's something that got me into the Electric Universe. So I'm grateful for that. And I never want to sound like I'm
Tess,
disrespectful.
I gotta
ever,
say, Tess,
because that's not
when
right.
I talk about that piece of the puzzle, I'm referring specifically to you. You
You
are that.
Thank you.
You
I love
are that piece of the puzzle that I'm talking about when I make that reference. You bring something unique, a perspective that is new and different to the table, and that is invaluable to all of us. And
Thank
so, and the fact that
Glad
you're
I
willing to say, hey, I got to refute this. This is happening live. That really connects us with our audience and allows you to have that interaction, which is so important. People who bring big ideas to the table need to be able to communicate real time with each other, and that's how that consensus is formed.
let's also
Thank
be
you.
honest. Let's also be
Awesome.
honest. It's not also very easy to suddenly just jump into a conversation with a bunch of people and have a conversation. I mean, look at how long it took Jim alone to even get me to understand what he was talking about. And when he finally did, I was like, this could have been what spawned this whole thing and drove Saturn into this thing and drove it into us and blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, what did that look like and how long ago was that? And then, of course, it pushed my ideas because Jano Cook doesn't go back that far. But this would push it back very far. And I'm like, oh, you have to sort of step back. And, of course, you have to you have to also weigh evidence that are contradictory against each other. Now, that's challenging because sometimes you only have their one reference. Like that one research, like for example, Mario Bildrep's stuff with regards to where the North Pole was facing, as if the Earth somehow had moved, the North Pole had moved, like physically, by the alignments of structures that we built as human beings or human being-like animals on the planet. So that alone, but I only have his one reference, so I don't know if it's true. You see what I mean? I want more, but I don't want to say he's lying either. I mean, I've looked at his data. It looks compelling. But that's also the same thing with other people's evidence. Like, you only have that one off, and you're like, like I have to read a paper or something. It looks like a good video, but am I really seeing this? Is this violation of anything else?
That's an electrical mindset that you are committed to, and that's good because we need people like you. But there's others, the historians. They've only got what somebody else has written down and said they saw. And so,
True.
and if that violates any of your physics laws, accordingly, that observation can invalidate the whole structure or that
Well, you
idea.
just described the creation of everything as myth. Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
literally, that's
yes.
what, like, biblical as in fictional.
Yeah, but see, the science worldview of this natural philosophy of materialism, it imposes values and frames that doesn't allow. I mean, it denies consciousness. It denies cosmic charge. Well, that's the interconnection of everything else that is. They're in denial, and until we get the rest of the elites, and that's your bankers, your architects, your artists, everybody. Those are your elites, and
Yeah,
we
but
have
we'd be
get them to
totally
understand that
exposing the
unconscious.
Masonic people. Like, I mean, they'd be going, hi.
Well, they don't even know that they have this unconscious belief or programming that
Makes them
everything.
worship Saturn?
No,
That's why you
No.
don't have to attack the group, because you attack the mindset, I think is what you're talking about.
Yes. Well, yes, because the mindset, of course, is secret and control, and symbolism being control, and power in symbolism. And of course, the truth is that once you, like I've said, I mean, you've said, we've all seen it. Once you know where the symbols come from, and you understand where these things are from, like the swords, for example, then how is this going to scare you? You're asking me to be scared of something I know more about than you do?
Neil, I got to tell you, I saw a squatter man in my beard this morning.
There you go. Well, that's...
I'm just saying.
But the thing is, this is unconscious programming. These values that the philosophy of materialism, and that's what we have to expose. They don't even know that that's how they're running their mindset, and until we address that. By inviting the artists and everything into this group and beginning to change the elites' mindsets, we're not going to get anywhere because those.
Thank you.
That's what's going to
My
change.
thoughts right now are this is us hopefully helping to spark something that will turn into eventually with the next step, I think, is to make a fictional. We're going to get some books out that are Electric Universe based or close to it. The next step would probably be some sort of television show or something of that nature, because that's really what needs to get done, is so that people can go, that's what the universe is really like, as opposed to Star Trek. That's it. I mean, because right now Star Trek dominates. We all think that we're going to slip through a barrier in the fabric of space and time, and we're going to go faster than light, and that's how we're going to get, using subspace, to another planet. But that's probably not how it's going to be. It's probably going to be like trying to sail a river. We don't know how this is going to work. Like.
Well, I can tell you how it's going to work. We have examples of bad versions of it. So we just use their tactics with better information. That's how things actually work. People want to avoid that because it's easy to just hate on larger businesses and governments. But ultimately, they operate correctly in order to shift paradigm. So creating the root or directing the Birkeland filament. If the Electric Universe is going to have any shot at it, it basically needs direction. It needs creative direction.
That one of the things, though, that I don't want to do is to build a story that also does not do disservice to the, like, for example, the original Battlestar Galactica in 1978, the 12 people, and they're all sitting around, and you recognize that each single person around that 12 colonies of man were all a different, ethnicity of mankind, period, And that was how this vision was progressing. Now, that's the 1970s. The 1960s, you had Kirk and them. But then you saw Picard in the 80s. So where are we at? I don't want to. Basically, I'm just saying that the end result is that a story should be philosophically connected to not only good and meaningful story about humanity and so forth, or the human nature or whatever, fares the human heart, but also that the stories themselves are connected to the overall philosophy of the connectedness of the electric universe. Would be a nice harmonious connection. And unfortunately, I don't know how to make that. I know what I want.
I can suggest a way.
But
I mean, there's a channel called Everything Wrong With, Cinema Sins. They basically take Hollywood movies for 20 minutes, do a rough cut on what's wrong with it. So basically, people no longer watch movies. They watch 20-minute cliff notes or like sarcastic renderings of these 3-hour movies. So imagine an Electric Universe channel with real brains behind it, assessing all contemporary media through the filter of proper cosmogony and his.
No, it's fun. I never get any sleep.
You guys ever seen Mystery Science Theater?
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Can you imagine watching old Cosmos videos and sitting around a bunch of people just commenting on the video while we watch it together?
I desperately I think that there's a massive gap in serious information, and people are desperate for it. True. And we live in a massively cynical, sarcastic world, and I just see that being the end of all science. So forgive me if I sound too
that's a bit dark,
too demure over here.
I do agree that it might not be best. Perhaps something, as you would say, besides the 20-minute format's a little bit better.
No, I just mean even a 10-minute thing saying, oh, check out Thor Dark World. It references alignment of planets. It references, all the different, I don't freaking watch those movies, but to be honest, in all of them, I've seen the little clips of them. They all reference planetary alignment, electric thunderbolts, and catastrophism. Every single one of these. If you showed people 3-4 Marvel movies in a row, relating it to mythology and explaining that 12,000 years ago, our people just like you and I saw that shit for real, excuse my language, I think it would actually resonate. People are fooled by shiny things.
Actually, we did actually do that.
Shiny things.
I actually have 2 of them made so far. They're actually in the specials directory or shorts, and they were just about clips of things. And I put a lot of videos of Godzilla because we were talking about Godzillas and all that stuff. And then I did another one on Thor and stuff like that. And we referenced the Star Wars.
But it's to quote to reference a terrible movie. It's limitless. It's true. You can find 100 movies like this that reference that have incredible $1 million animations behind them, so no one has to go and make their own version of planetary life. Take it and put right next to it Homer, everything Tess talks about in right next to a Hollywood movie is the carrot. You get people interested in that, then it's exciting. Then people are like, oh, let's tear down this current.
Okay. We can. You know what? You've sold me. I think we're going to have to do something here. I was thinking of other things to do after I was done my little specials. So, because I have a bunch of specials I'm trying to get done. But once those are done, then I have a whole new idea, a whole new thing I wanted to do. And I was like, what can we do here? This might be it. However, I want to address something that I saw in chat real quick. Sully's girl, about your 6 girls. Thank you very much. It's because of people like you. Silent Murmur, people do know what Star Trek is science fiction, but the trouble is that science fiction leads into reality because your mind goes to what you think you can do. So if you're constantly thinking that you can bust through dimensions by using mass and stuff, you start building CERN, where we don't need to build CERN. We need to build something that like Sapphire. You get my meaning? That's why your brain is directing yourself down that pathway because of your biases of your science fiction, almost. And
it's a gateway. You use it as a gateway to either debunk or to confirm things.
Science fiction is a gateway drug, is what we're saying.
Yeah, it is. It is.
So we need
and the first
Star Trek
free,
motto.
so.
We need a Star Trek motto for the Electric View so that they'll stop unprogram themselves from their unconscious programming that the world is dead, and we say everything's alive and charged and connected. Whatever we iconic or meme that we put out there.
Actually, stop. Everything is alive and charged and connected. Thank you. That's all we needed. We're done. That's the motto. You've just said it.
It's a little wordy.
No, that's three things. People remember three things. Works. Everything is alive and charged and connected. Done.
Alive, charged, and connected.
I mean, that's what he said, and that's.
How about
Everything is electric.
Or did he say electric? I don't know. Now we're gonna have to go back and review this later. However, I think that's what he said.
The three are alive, charged, and connected.
Whatever it is,
Neil,
it's good.
I love your thinking, Neil. It's great.
Well, he
Love
said it, and I was like, okay, that we're done. You don't need, like, your motto is that short. You did it. Like, I didn't want to hear anything else. That's perfect. Anyway, not to cut you off.
That means everybody gets to say it over and over and over again until you go insane.
How about connected, charged, and alive?
Okay, now you're just messing with me. Anyway, so guys, it's 5 after the hour. I'll give us another, say, 11 minutes, and we'll call it there, and I'll let people get going. But please, do we have more people that you had questions that were written down or something? God, I don't want to be ignoring people. So.
No, I just want to say thanks for letting me speak and hearing my thoughts, and thanks to all of y'all. Nice to be back, and shout out to everybody in the chat room.
Always.
Yeah.
Contribution is invaluable, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Well,
from me as
Ellen
well.
Muldoon said something I thought was kind of nice to sort of tap things off. We love you, Tess.
I love you too, guys. Thank you.
So what were you saying? Sorry.
Miss Edenaldu, which is kind of I just kind of wanted to say her name because I thought it was cute. But her name is Edenaldu, and she said, "It is funny how we all feel alone and questioning all we know. It doesn't take long to find like minds if you're fishing for more questions," which I think is really insightful.
Well, you're not wrong that the entire culture, commercial-wise, is based on atomization of individuality and such. And in fact, they stress it over and over again, like, you are an individual, and like all that kind of stuff. But in actuality, like, no, we're a community of people trying to, like, survive, a family even in some cases. And you know, but you buy more and look for satisfaction elsewhere in that type of environment. Whereas in this one, together we walk hand in hand into the future, trying to figure out what it is that we are. And I find that to be a much friendlier way of doing things.
Absolutely. I think we have to realize, though, that it's a disconcerting process. The experience of it riding a wave, you know, it's very fluid. You're on the top of things. You're looking down and you're seeing things that make sense from your perspective in a new way, better than ever before. And yet, oh my God, I'm riding on water. You know, I mean, it can be scary. You know, that idea that we're not sand. We're continuing to challenge the paradigm. We're continuing to further the discussion. We're continuing to open our minds. We're also willing to call bullshit. And I think that it can be very challenging when you find something, a paradigm that feels secure to you and feels right for you, and you fight and fight and fight and fight for it. It's hard to be in a position to say, well, maybe there's more. And I think what we have to do is foster sort of both the passion and also the, well, maybe there's more, as dual sort of Birkeland currents. You know, so you got to have both.
Speaking of which, I put on the screen this thing to emphasize the difference between the model that we were discussing and the model that Don Scott is proposing. What we seem to be talking about mostly in our discussion is that the what's that word? Someone say it. Those stars that I can't say.
Pleiades.
The Pleiades.
Why can't I say that? Anyway.
Pleiades.
Okay.
Yo, Playa.
Pleiades.
Seven sisters.
Okay, got it. Okay, Pleiades, got it. Okay, anyway, this would where they put the sun, we would put them, and then we would be somewhere out on one of those rings, out to the side, left or right, as opposed to the actual middle part, which is basically not unlike it seems to be the case. But it doesn't mean that this is true. It just, I mean, their model is not wrong, but we were also off to one side as one of those spherical shells, our heliopause being off to that one side. Then this is this could actually be the case. You know, there's nothing wrong with this idea. There's a ring of stars around the Seven Sisters, Pleiades, and yeah, so that we could be just one of them on that pathway, which is of course going up, circling around another current itself. So, you know, this is a interesting situation that but they are just talking about this particular model, and there is a difference, but they are both valid models. They are just happen to be one. We don't have a lot of, I mean, they have a lot of experience with their own model that this seems to be the way that it works in the laboratory, but we're seeing that we have gravity, so that if there were anything forming off to the side like that, they just fall down. You know, we can't really see what would happen over long term. This is a little bit of a unique situation, so we have to understand that there might be adaptations, if you know what I mean, but not violations. Just something that we missed.
I guess.
Well, that model in itself is new, so.
Well, you're getting the idea, yeah.
I just why not mention it in the Skype chat? I posted two quick things: how the human skull between the eyes looks like a squatter man, and then underneath that, the local supercluster, which is modeled and really looks like these filamentary branches. And I know we don't, you know, I guess you may have talked about it, but these types of simulations actually can show the branching structure, and maybe we can use it to reference like where certain stars are on the chain, or I don't know. I thought it might be interesting.
No, I think it is.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just looking at all these images that I realized he put some more in here. Anyway, I gotta say this has actually been a very interesting talk. We started talking about Voyager. We do have it's good to see that there are different ideas, but like I said, they're not violations of the actual theory, because we have to actually see what's different models themselves. We do know what the sun is doing right near its surface, and we're starting to figure out what this might actually mean. Like, is it liquid metallic hydrogen or not? You know, that's you know, these are big questions. Or are we actually changing the properties of matter? That I think seems to be the case, because we see so much of that, and I hope that makes sense to people, that we do see these weird situations where you know, obviously gravity has changed. I mean, dinosaurs existed. You know, like, we see elephants that are bigger than anything the elephant that should be alive. You know, like, and that's just, so that means that's not very far away. That's like mastodons and mammoths were too big to live today, and that's not that long ago. You know,
it's pretty funny how I would think that tusks and the length of saber-toothed tigers' teeth play some factor into it. I mean, we have versions of those animals, but their teeth are much smaller.
It's true. Is it something to do with well, an idea immediately comes to mind is, if you change the electrical environment of, not only do the materials change, but do biological materials change? Like, do you express your DNA differently in a different electrical environment? This is one of the questions. Will you actually give birth to a human, or will it look like a human if you're giving birth to something on Mars?
Well, you know,
I mean, the theories of epigenetics.
Copper. Yeah, it's copper. Everything was copper based. We still have crabs that are copper based, and the dinos were copper based. Apparently, according to the pyramid guys, we were copper as well, humans. Base.
But is copper just? Was that a denotation of the metal that we used, or was that because the sky was different, therefore we looked a different color? Like, what are we talking here?
No, the crabs are biologically copper-based. They're not iron-based. And I think that alligators are copper-based too. I'm
Oh, you
not
mean
sure,
the
but this is biological.
the blood. That okay, I'm sorry. Now this is okay. Sorry, my brain was not.
That's really fascinating, actually. That our blood is ferric now.
Yeah.
And maybe that's really. I've never even thought of that. That's great.
Which is 56 Parat, most stable element there is.
So you're trying to tell me that we are all Vulcans at one point?
Yep. We were 200. We're only 200.
I don't think he's saying we're all stable.
Are you out of your Vulcan mind? You green-blooded bugger.
Well, we didn't have the logic system back then.
But still, no, that's a really interesting point. I never really thought of that. That's well, there you go. And of course, blue bloods. But unfortunately, the blue blood idea is something just recent. Unfortunately, it has to do with being pale, therefore proving you didn't do work, and therefore you could see the veins in your skin, and they were blue. But if you worked outside, you were tan, and they couldn't see your veins, therefore you're poor.
I have to defer on that, but don't get me started.
Okay, well, no, obviously there are lots of different. I mean, if Rick was here, there would be a whole thing that would just go off into the Anunnaki or something. So, but
unfortunately, something like that.
Hashtag RH negatives.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's call them the Greek gods. Sounds better.
Well, there you go. But you're back.
Prettier.
Your pigment is actually determined by what you eat. So I don't know. Maybe they just eat a lot of. Who knows?
It's not determined by what you eat. It's determined by where you're at on the planet. I mean, obviously,
and some of us could be lizards. I don't know.
Well, I don't really. Yeah. Well,
if you were a lizard, Neil, I would be okay with it.
I would be starring in a remake of V.
I literally took the words out of my mouth. I remember V from the 80s.
Oh,
it was the most
Robert
Englund.
Thing oh my God. And eating the mice. Oh my God, it totally freaked me out. And
that and Manimal. Anybody remember Manimal?
I do. I totally remember Manimal. Okay, it was on. I used to watch that and Automan back to back. It was a 2-man. It was a special. I actually have all of Automan downloaded. Okay, seriously. Manimal.
That is the deepest pull. No one ever knows that. I remember as like a 5-year-old, maybe. It was terrified the hell out of me.
Oh, it did. Because it was like that. And of course, I just watched Cat People with Natasha Kerensky or whatever her name is. And I was
my God.
Or Kaninsky, I was like, because that was like, I'm sure that's like now the image of my evil women in my head, like, don't trust her. Why? She looks like her in my head. Like, but I'm sure that I'm scarred by that is what I'm saying. There's that other one was called Voyagers, where Phineas Fogg had the little watch and there was a kid, and it was sort of like, I don't know if it was before or after Time Bandits, but it seemed to be inspired by that, and they would go through time and try to solve puzzles, but it was sort of broken, so it was sort of like the TARDIS, but he carried it in his hand. And the actor's name was John Hexum, I think, and he unfortunately shot himself in the head by playing Russian roulette with blanks. So I think that was how that show ended.
What a way to go.
Yeah, and it was a good show too, but I only had like 8 or 9 episodes. So I have all those too.
You guys remember the Slee Stacks?
Okay, you got me. I don't know that one.
From the Land of the Lost?
Nope.
Oh God. Well, that must be an American thing. Well, they did do a movie later, but it was a kids show. It was a Saturday morning.
I know of it. I don't remember that specifically.
In the land of the lost.
Hell yeah, outro song.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. Yeah, it was a family on a boat trip, and they got sucked into a hole in the earth, and inside this underground universe, they had to survive. And it wasn't really understood if they went through a time warp or a hole in the planet, whatever. There was something went to another place. And in this other place, there were these kind of bad guys that were lizard people, and they were called Sleestaks. There's a guy here in Portland who's obsessed with Sleestaks, and he's made a Sleestak costume, and it's the thing.
All right, you got me on that one. You know, I was.
Yay! I know a subculture thing that you don't know. Finally.
What was that one where they went under the water through a tunnel or something, and they were kids, but it was like British or something. I don't know. I remember that one really freaked me out. It was like sort of like the Magic School Bus on drugs. I know. I barely remember like that. It's just one of those things. Like I was like. It's sort of like knowing that I've watched Puff the Magic Dragon, but I can't remember anything about it.
That's the correct way to remember that show or movie, whatever.
See, you didn't know it was real.
I don't even know. Did it really exist? Is the Puff the?
See, now I'm questioning. Now I don't even know if it even existed.
You're showing your old school street cred, bro. That's it.
Yo, Manimal is the oldest street, like that is the OG street cred. That and V, if you know those two, then you're good.
Oh, but we don't even admit to watching Battlestar Galactica 1981, though.
Didn't have it, unfortunately.
I have it all downloaded.
It certainly wasn't as good, but I thought the guy that smoked the cigar was pretty cool.
Okay, now I'm gonna have to go watch it.
The original Starbuck.
Oh, sorry, Face.
Yeah.
What's his name? It gets right into my tongue. Dirk Benedict.
But the female Starbuck was so cool, though. So.
Kara Thrace, or
yeah,
what's her real name?
She pulled off badass really well.
Katie Sackhoff, and yes, she did. Although when you hear her talk about it, there's a little thing that you get to if you look up. Someone is displaying the mock-up of of her Viper, and so they built it or something, and it's like really like a 1/5 scale model or something. I'm not sure what it is, but it's really detailed. And she goes and explains what it was like to be sitting in that suit of rubber inside of a cockpit with no air conditioning, trying to do your lines, and it's 44 degrees inside an unair conditioned hangar. You're freaking out, I'll tell you that. She was like, those things where she's just screaming and looking like her eyes were bulging and like she was sweating because she was like in a state of delirium practically.
That wasn't acting.
Yeah, that wasn't acting. She was just losing her freaking mind.
Let's play Torture the Actress.
Apparently that happened in that new Terminator movie too. They were like, oh yeah, we were on a freeway in Spain or something and it was 44 degrees and she's from Alberta. You know,
see, there's a lot of stories like that. It's an unusually high number of stories where actresses are just subjected to all sorts of bullshit. Actors too. But you know, they
obviously
have stunt doubles for that, you know. So
sorry, that reminds me of Captain Kirk, William Shatner in this movie where he's playing William Shatner and he says, well, that, sir, was a stunt double. I always use a stunt double. Except for love-making scenes. I always insist on doing them myself.
OGAF.
Oh, Kirk.
Kirk.
Anyway, guys, this has been real. I really enjoyed this, so thank you all.
The highlight of my week.
It was it?
Yeah, always.
I'm very glad that it was.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Take care, friends.